for 3 years, no one else can be chosen to get money, no one else can reapply for anything. That's those 10 programs for 3 years, and then another group like this is reconvened in 3 years. Is that what you're saying?
I think that's the question I'm asking is whether or not we're separating the money out, because I'm okay with either of those, actually. So I understand the difference. I'm okay with either of those. I'm okay with saying that we're going to take a $35 million pot and we're going to give everybody the money now and you just have 3 years to spend it. And I'm also okay saying we're going to pick more programs and they're going to get allocated the money on a renewal basis for 3 years too, which I think is administratively less burdensome to the staff and the agency. So I'm okay with either, because I think you can manage both to the same end.
So I think by hearing the conversation that we might not be ready to second your motion and vote on it, sounds like there's still a lot of things.
So in the one case, you're giving these 10 programs 3.5 million and say you got 3 years to spend it. And the other thing you're saying, we're going to guarantee that these 10 programs are going to get refunded every year. So basically you're giving them what, 10 million or whatever the.
Yeah, that's option B.
Okay.
Right. But I agree with John. I think the idea would be you would, instead of giving 10 programs 3.5 million, then 10 new ones the second year, go ahead and give 30 programs $1 million a year and then refund them each of the 2 years. You still are going to fund 30 programs over 3 years, but you get them all started right away rather than a built-in a year or two delay. So I think we're all trying to.
So it's picking more. It's picking more upfront and funding them at a heavier dollar amount.
Because I don't believe most people can spend the ones you fund with 3.5 million in the first year. They're not going to spend most of that money till years 2 or 3. So the money is just sitting there. Whereas if you fund more money and get a bunch of them started spending money the first year, then you supplement them second and third.
It almost feels like we should have started with 11 before
so
10.
I do. So I'm in agreement with what I think John's trying to say, but I think it's also trying to accomplish the same thing you are. Just in
It is.
Well, Scott, the discussion has been influenced by your decision to start with 10 programs. If you had started with 35 programs, we might have a different discussion.
Right. Well, if we started, I think the interesting thing is, if you then look at the 3 years of funding as one big pot, then you have much more money to play with than if you look at it as 1 year and it's $35 million.
But isn't there an inherent problem with that? Because we don't know what the money's going to be. We don't really know what the projected savings are going to be to the state.
We have an estimate. I agree with you, Sammy. We do not know exactly. And then to the point that I believe John made, if the legislature makes a decision next year to add more or even more than they did this year, we need to kind of hold a space for what would this committee recommend in that scenario. So we do have estimates, and I think Mary can remind me what those are for year 2 and year 3, and we can certainly bring that into the conversation.
And real quick,
Javier.
That was my question. If we do make a decision, today, and either the numbers change considerably, and we're thinking differently down the line, is there a way to change the process? Like next year, if we decided, this isn't working out the way we thought it would work out, is there an opportunity to change the process?
Well, I think we can, anticipate scenarios that this would have this committee want to come back together again. I mean, that's the best answer I can offer. I would say absolutely. You have a responsibility, and we can also talk about, I think it would be beneficial for this committee to decide, is this a 3-year tour of duty? Is it, oh, thanks, Mary. Is it shorter than that, longer than that? And I would think, in your capacity, you would want to continue to come back as certain kinds of issues come up. And we've already, thanks to Charity and others, have already said, absolutely, we can provide you with the grant monitoring information. I think the variable that would be most important is what if the funding changes significantly in either direction?
Yeah. John?
And I think also what's key is to ensure that we're giving folks both enough time and enough money to do the job. So if we give folks too little money, right? And it relates to like having too many applicants, right?
Yeah.
First of all, to me, this is, I don't hate it, but I use the analogy of dating. I'd rather have 10 beautiful dates to choose from than to just have one. If that makes sense, you know.
Donald Trump.
He who should now be mentioned. Right? So just to be clear, I think that's a good problem. In an ideal world, I would love to have too many qualified candidates to not enough. Right. That's a good thing. But to be sure, once again, I want to make sure, like when I heard, like, if we take year one money and stretch out over 3, does that put the applicants in a better position to succeed? So that's just something to think about. I agree with John. I'm cool with either one, granted that we're giving folks enough time and enough funding with, as we mentioned, the opportunity for us to do an eval.
My concern with option B, I have a couple of them. I understand the merits, the potential benefits for staff, and again, I want to be sympathetic to that. But my 2 concerns are, one is it precludes other good programs coming up a year from now or 2 years from now to be able to apply for that. So you have to have your ducks in a row right now in order to apply. That's one concern I have. And then the second concern that I have is, I think it probably changes the dynamic in terms of advocating for additional funds, because it becomes about those programs that have been funded and not about the program as a whole. So again, if people want to have community-based organizations and other nonprofits want to have a strategy where they are again asking for the legislature to allocate additional dollars, it's not about this amorphous Prop 47, we want to do good things in the community. It becomes about these 15 or 17 or 30 programs that we have already funded and advocating specifically for those programs, as opposed to the benefit of the state as a whole in terms of addressing the problems of the folks in the community who need the money the most.
I would just add that when we talk about programs like this, I mean, there are many other examples of funding that go to programs where there are more good applications than there is funding, right? And so coming off of a little bit what Shelley said, I mean, we see this with trauma recovery, right? We have a very limited amount of money from Prop 47 for that, and there are lots of unmet crime survivor needs that don't get funded across the state right now. And it's not, the desire to fund programs that are good is what we should be doing, right? But I think we have to also make sure that those things deliver meaningful outcomes to the community. That's the balance. And so there is a challenge with the state budget, which isn't the discussion here today, but you know, the Department of Finance made its calculation. There are costs that come from places like Judicial Council, for example, that take away from those things. And so it spurns the need for additional advocacy. And I would just be hesitant to, not water down, but to dilute the resources in a way that doesn't actually allow us to get the impact we need. So I just, you know, it's a reality, but we have to still do what we have to do.
I think we're also making an assumption that I don't necessarily know that I agree with. I mean, we've been saying, and I know it's for the sake of example, that 10 programs at 3.5 million over 3 years, $1 million a year. I know we're going to still discuss maximum amounts, but there are going to be a lot of programs, I think, that come in significantly less than that. A community-based organization with, you know, $200,000 a year can do a lot of really good work. So we are saying, for the sake of argument, we're doing 10 a year, but we may find that we're very well, once we start going, number one's asking for this much and getting down to the dollar, we could have 30 that are going to be funded with just this pot of money for 3 full years.
There's another reality coming off John's comment that I think we have to keep in mind in the background in terms of political reality. Our legislators are being bombarded by people who are trying to undermine Prop 47. And if we make decisions for 10 programs and counties like San Joaquin and Tehama and Shasta and San Luis Obispo and Monterey are left out, the legislators who represent those districts are not going to be persuaded that Prop 47 was a good thing. So the more programs we can fund throughout the state, I think the better off we're going to be in terms of shoring up the political support for what we're doing.
I think that there's something to be said about some kind of level of competitiveness, to stay competitive, not to be comfortable, and and I go back to the comment that was made earlier about, you know, it's kind of an inherent contradiction, right? Sometimes there's brick and mortar and jail expansion that's going to be going out there, And actually, that's gonna reduce costs. This whole thing is about reducing recidivism. And I feel as though we can actually undermine the savings to the state at times, right? If we're, so I don't know, I just feel as though, number one, competitiveness is really important. Number two, we're not sure what's gonna be available. And I like the idea of having other folks being able to come into the fold. And so I don't know which option that is, A, B, C, or maybe there's a D option, I don't know. But I like the more flexibility and making certain that folks are actually putting the money to good use again.
Do we have to make a decision before this RFP goes out? Programs we want to fund?
No.
Because if we set a threshold, if we're a committee and we're not going to fund mediocrity, just because it exists and they get within the money threshold, we're not going to fund mediocrity. So if it isn't rated as this group as a very good or excellent proposal, we're just not going to fund it. And so what we get left with may be 8 proposals, because so many were mediocre. Or what we may get left with is 40 proposals, because so many are so good.
Right. 2 thoughts on that. You do not have to have any consideration of how many programs you're going to fund. And of course, I support funding the best ones and seeing how far the funding goes once you determine these basic structures. Your cap is going to be an up to. So, up to $1 million per year. We see that in a lot of our other grants. On the recent strengthening law enforcement and community relations, there was an up to amount. Some came in below that, so you could go a little bit further. The other strong cautionary note that I want to make, it's still in support of what you're after, Scott, and this gets into a little bit of the technical process for you as raters, and Tony Jackson is our researcher. He'll train you in great depth, but we want to push really hard for you to not at the outset set a minimum score level, because that does something to your thought process as you are rating. We want to have you rate totally objectively. We use, and you'll get trained extensively in this, so I'm just going to give you the 10-second summary. You basically use a rating scale like we remember from school of letter grades A, B, C, D, F. And we don't want the thought process to say we're only going to fund B pluses and A's, because then you don't use the whole scale. We really want you to use the whole scale. And then after that, we have the magic of all the analysis, and we say the top 10% gives you this number of projects, the top 15%. So that's just a little bit of scoring training that I had to throw in, because I think it would be a better result to just find that out later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ricardo, are you, we obviously have a lot of opinions here. Do we need to continue on 10? Do you want to direct the conversation more if you need more, or should we move to 11?
May I make one more comment? I'm so sorry. Before we move on, I just really want to say this. In the event, and this should be also and maybe I'm jumping in this case, I'm sorry, but state of county, this is about the state of California reducing recidivism, right? And really, I think that's really serious work, right? And I say, what if a county is actually not reducing recidivism, but actually there's higher arrest rates now. There's higher, folks being criminalized. And we've just committed money for this county. Again, that's where I'm getting at right now, that I would have a problem with that we're committed all this money.
I think you need to consider what we're looking at is how effective are these programs with their client? Are they impacting their clients in a way that we're supporting? What the police do and how they police and how they arrest is something that these entities will have no power over. So you can have 2 things happen. One, a crazy police force that's just going after everybody, arresting people. But with respect to these funds and how they're being used, everybody has positive outcomes. So I don't think you can tie the 2 together, because they're independent and one doesn't really control the other.
Thanks, Frankie. Hey, Ricardo, what was your response?
So I think, so let me give you the purpose for why we did it this way. We wanted you to first have the conversation sans money. It didn't take very long for you to get there. So it might be beneficial for us to move forward to the funding section and then revisit it, and then see how much of the conversation changes. When you start with money, it tends to drive the conversation a particular way. We wanted to avoid that, but you're there. So let's just go there and then revisit it.
So,
can I chime in?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, Co-Chair.
Okay, awesome. The conversation is incredibly robust. I think the concerns are being well covered. I would just like to add my humble opinion that I agree entirely with Judge Eskin that we will be in a precarious position with Prop 47 moving forward over the next couple of years. I would say there's even a full-blown assault by our District Attorneys Association and others that are genuinely concerned about Prop 47, are fighting it tooth and nail. And I could not agree more that one of the best ways for us to invest ourselves with constituents in various districts is to fund them, befriend them, and have them be really the voice to particular legislators that this is something that needs to continue. So I really appreciate that political reality. And as much as we all love Prop 47, there are a lot of people who feel very passionately on the other side, and they are not going away, and I think believe they have a potential of reversing the consequences. So I think we have to always be mindful of that. Secondly, I hate to limit our funding options before we know which applications we get. We just don't know what's out there, and I think we have to see what we get, what's excellent, and make a decision at the appropriate time. But trying to make that decision now, I think is very, very, I think it's early and too soon to know what we have. So with that said, I really appreciate the conversation, and I think the bases are being fully covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Okay, so if you can follow along with this on page 15 under funding considerations. And like I said, we'll try to get through the first page and then we'll jump back to the prior section and then we'll go from there. So above it, that pretext is something that we've been referring to for quite a while, where it talks about how much funding is available. And I think Stephanie had asked the question earlier. So with the supplemental allocation, we know there's approximately 35 million available. So then what we want you to kind of think about, and it sounds like you guys are already starting to flesh out some of those details, are decisions about caps, potentially, if that's something that you're in favor of, and then just overall how the funds will be kind of divided. So we'll start with prompt A. It says, will the funds be divided based on geography or population? So yesterday, and I'll have to bring up something from yesterday because it'll impact today, there was a, I don't want to misquote you, John B. There was I won't call it a recommendation, but a discussion about regional approaches. So that may or may not impact option A if the sense of this group is that you wanted to do that distribution. And John, you could probably describe it a lot better than I would butcher it. That might impact what we decide to do there.
What we would normally do, if this was only counties applying, is saying small counties can apply for up to 600,000, medium counties can apply for up to 1.5, large counties can apply for 3. And we set those standards. Because this is not counties and we're talking about cities, so you can't figure out size, and you can't, and community college districts and all this, that's a much more difficult way to approach. So either you don't differentiate size, and we just differentiate it when we read the proposals and how they sell that to us, that we believe that they're saying the right amount for the size of their county, or we take a more regional approach like John suggested yesterday and divide the state into certain regions and say certain regions can apply for this based on the size of their population that have experienced arrest or incarceration, et cetera. So start the conversation.
Frank, well, I think it's important to consider two things. One is, what is the population at large, right? The universe of if they're talking about the city or the county or the district, but then also, how does that measure up against the number of people that they're anticipating to serve, right? Because you can say my county is down and out, has 1 million people that are affected by this issue, but we're going to serve 10. And so I think that those are two metrics that we should look at in together.
Yeah,
well, I'm just kind of wondering.
Okay.
Sorry.
Tom, and then.
Oh. I have nothing against cities or special districts, but we're asking applicants how they're going to provide mental health treatment substance abuse disorder treatment. Cities don't run these they don't do those programs. Mosquito abatement districts don't do that. I mean, so I'm just wondering how, how we are, without some sort of, like I said, an interagency collaboration, just a question.
Richard?
Yeah.
But whatever.
I agree.
That was just an example.
All the social service programs are run through the county, not through the city. City are usually, street sidewalks, that kind of stuff, and the counties are the probation and mental health. But going back to the population, even if it's a college that is applying in Butte County, they still have the same population in Butte County. So I am going to propose that we go not by region, but possibly by population, because no matter what, even if it is a mosquito abatement or is a college or it is a city, they're still within that county's population.
Sorry, Bonnie.
I don't think it's either or. So I hear what you're saying, but it would be the population of whatever region. So say, for example, it's a school district and maybe the surrounding area, it would be that population, and of course the impacted population would be the second metric. Because it's not, the population numbers aren't always the same, and they don't always balance out. Riverside County is not a very densely populated county. However, when you look at the impacted population, it's significant.
Thanks, Bonnie. Richard, I think you wanted to, Richard and Javier?
It's not really a rebuttal, but the issue we run into is if our county is the applicant, I can't spend money in Tehama County. I can't spend money in the next county. My board of supervisors is over my county, so I don't have jurisdiction over the next county. So if we're just doing a region, then we start to run into borders. So now I have to work with 2 board of supervisors or 3 boards of supervisors. It makes it even more cumbersome.
Can I?
Javier?
No, I was just going to ask Bonnie, why not make the impacted population the #1 factor?
So since he doesn't have a microphone, why not make the impacted population the #1 metric?
I would. I mean, ideally, I think that would be better than what the, general population is. And then I would also look at children. I keep hearing that the purpose of this is to reduce recidivism. I think that's a goal, but this is mental health and substance abuse. And then when we look at generationally or intergenerationally, the children of those impacted become significant. They have a 79% likelihood of going into the criminal justice system. So for that reason, I think it's very important to remember it's not recidivism reduction, that's a goal, but this is money that's marked to address the underlying causes of incarceration. And if we're going to look at, how to get counties to work together, maybe the incentive could be looking at their population, seeing how they're impacted, and money on the table. That's a pretty good motivator.
Thanks, Bonnie. John Bowders, is that a hand?
I just wanted to clarify, so to the comment about regional, what I proposed yesterday, which I'm not married to in any way, but the regions compete for a percentage of the total pot of money. So it wouldn't be that a region has to get together to make an application. So it wouldn't be Butte and Tehama and Sutter all have to agree if they're part of a region. It would be that they have maybe 10% of the total funds is allocated to a region.
So it's a set aside.
It's a set aside for which they are then not competing with Los Angeles for their own allocated smaller percentage perhaps. And you make those distinctions based on the metrics. We discussed a number of metrics, but I don't think anybody ever came to an agreement as to what metrics we would want if we had chose a geographic distribution set aside approach. So that is the explanation of the
Richard, what's your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. If it's set up a region, because we're working with ESG funds, and our organization is a 9-county continuum of care. So the area that's going to get the bulk of the money, essentially what's going to happen is the clients are going to receive the money, but they're going to have to move to the area where it's being provided because it's in this region. They didn't allow us to. So if he's doing that where we can compete in our own region, that's wonderful.
Yes, let me have Shelley and then Bonia.
Yeah, we've done that before successfully. We've divided up grant allocations among different size courts based upon the number of judges, and then they compete against each other for the dollars. And what that would do also would alleviate some of the concerns that Judge Eskin raised about making sure that the dollars are spent throughout the state. And then also we'll be in a position where we don't have counties or other entities that have funds to hire a professional grant writer to write their application, going up against counties where they have very, very, very few limited resources to even put an application together. So I think it would spread the dollars further.
Great feedback. Ricardo?
I just have one really small interjection. So, know that another option is you don't have to, do the set asides. You could just decide to have all proposals compete against each other equally. It's something that we've done in other grants. And the thought process is, if this ESC does a good enough job, and by you guys, I mean all of us obviously, writing a clear RFP, it shouldn't matter if you're small, medium, or large, we're all responding to the same prompts. And that way you don't have to worry about that as much. So it's just a true open competitive process. We did it recently for our Strength and Law Enforcement Community Relations grant. And we ended up with statewide geographic distribution of grant funds. It wasn't intentional, it was just that particular body said, we're gonna fund the best proposals. But just to note what that means is, if you have a scenario, I'll pick on the large counties because it'll make sense, where you have a lot of proposals from LA, a lot of proposals from San Diego, for example, and they get funded, but you rate them based on that criteria. That's just one approach. Now, it tends to work itself out, but.
I think Vonya, you were up, and then Chief James, and then Richard.
I just wanted to say that sometimes if we have a governmental hat on, we think in terms of counties, but a community-based organization doesn't have those kind of boundaries. And so maybe it's hard for the governmental agency to go across those boundaries, but that's what a good CBO does.
Yep.
I wasn't clear on what impacted population meant. Can someone bring that up?
My turn.
Yep.
Issue I have with the open application is in our application, we're gonna start scoring, and we're gonna start leveraging. But LA County can leverage $1 billion. Shasta County can leverage $1 million. So who's gonna score higher? Even though we're all applying for 1.5 million, we're out. So I strongly disagree with not doing some type of regional.
Okay. John.
For me, I think. I agree with the impact of population. If that's like to me, 1A is stressing collaboration. Some of this, like to Vonya's point, because like for me, the folks I deal with in Oakland, when we talk about substance abuse and mental health issues, we talk about a population that's transient. You know what I mean? Gentrification, displacement is very real in California. So our folks are not just centralized in one area no more. Folks are going back and forth. So I think it's very prudent if we stress the collaboration piece, right? And that can help get around some of these hoops, as well as going back to Madam Chair and what the judge said, the need to just being proactive and thinking ahead, right? To make sure that we're hitting places to where, for the outside strategy, outside organizing, trying to get more pots of money to this group here, right? To make sure that those legislators in turn, or to your point, Richard, what you're saying, making sure folks are saying, look, we want to have fair access too. Because I know I'm coming from Alameda County, so I get it when folks say that Bay and LA, we're larger, we get a larger share. Although we can counter that by saying we do send majority of folks in. But I think the reality is how do we balance the needs of the people and how people are dispersed throughout this state in a way that makes sense, in a way that's truly effective, without compromising the integrity of the funding.
I just wanted to add on as something, we're thinking about this, and I appreciate staff presenting it in a way where we break it out to talk about the elements. But off of Richard's point, one of the reasons I think we have to still define what the impacted population is, or how we measure that. But one of the reasons I think geographic set-asides or regions is important is several. I mean, remember that we want to collect data, and people who are impacted by the criminal justice system, that happens in all counties, all sizes. And so we need data about how interventions work in rural communities. I think we want to actually incentivize smaller communities to do things proactively about this. And we have to remember that, to Judge Eskin's point, these are the populations that are often represented by the electeds who don't like Prop 47. And so having an investment there forces them to confront how this model, this change actually is good for them politically and financially in their communities. You know, and I think the last thing is that if you do an at-large thing, they won't apply at all, to his point. I mean, I used to work in a rural county, and they don't want to apply at all. They just don't feel that they'll have a chance. And so I think you can manage that. We can come up probably with a formula. It's difficult to do that, but I would encourage us to try that, because I think that's the best way to spread the message.
I'm hearing a lot of support of the regional approach. Vanya?
I was just wondering, would it be, possible to maybe have 2 or 3, like I heard someone say small, medium, and large? Because, you know, that way that these rural communities, which kind of sounds like coded words for white communities who want resources, can get them, but not at a more preferential treatment than any other community, especially those communities most impacted by incarceration. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that to move past this, why don't we create a small, medium, and large, and don't give any of them the preferential. Let's just look at the number that have been impacted.
I actually want to just add to that. I guess my feeling about this is that we're talking about these political realities, and frankly, I feel as though if the opposition is going to be the opposition, no matter whether you give them money or not, they're going to stay. They're going to stay in opposition to Prop 47. It was the people of the state of California that voted this in. I think what we need to show is effectiveness with this money. We need to show efficacy, not necessarily appease people that are opposing this movement around Prop 47. So I just really, frankly, want to get away from that and just say, look, who has the most effective strategy? Who is being, and if they're not performing again, then that's a whole different conversation. But I just feel as though if we're trying to use the money for political gamemanship, then I just really have a serious problem with that.
And just so a couple of things on small, medium, and large, which is, it's perfectly fine if you want to do that, but there's just some clarifying things that I think as a committee you need to kind of agree on. So typically when we do small, medium, and large, we do it based on population size. And I know that's not what you're advocating, but I'll come back to that. And we'll get that from the Department of Finance. They've got statistics. And so we could delineate that out. One of the points that could come up is that you could have an agency that's in, so because we're not just talking about public agencies, but there was just all that sub-level stuff, and just because they're in that designation, they get to apply for whatever that maximum is. So that may or may not influence you, but just kind of a point of reference. But if we do decide to go with, I think what you've been saying, which is those that are impacted, I think Stephanie's point is really critical. We do have to define what that means and how we would measure it. So that when you guys get them back, if someone says, these are my most impacted members, it means the same thing to all of you. So just kind of keep that in mind.
I thought that was clear who the impacted population was just by the definition of Prop 47 offenses. And they are people with mental health and substance abuse, people who have been convicted of Prop 47 offenses, who may or may not have gotten Prop 47.
In proportion to their population size of the county?
I mean, I think that only works for one piece of it, because as we talked about yesterday, we talked about self-report, what were the 4 definitions that John kind of provided. So I don't know if that's so clearly defined.
Mr. Chair, as staff, we could come back to you with some proxy measures. Counting population is obviously easy, but things that come to mind, it's going to have to be a proxy because I don't think we can get everything, but we could look at things like felony drug arrests, misdemeanor drug arrests by county. Those data are pretty, at least they're collected in a standardized way. This is just one of the frustrating things that you want to say, okay, let's go after the identified population, but there's no really clear agreed upon metric of what that would be. So can we offer some suggestions about that? Or
yes.
Scott, do you want to spend more time even to get to the threshold issue of, do you want to divvy up the pot? Because you could just go with the straight quality. And as Ricardo mentioned, in the strengthening grant, we wound up awarding grants really quite nicely across the entire state without set-aside pots or
thoughts about straight quality, no set-asides.
My question would be, can we make it clear that our intent is, because I think the judge and others have made a very good point, that we want to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that everybody feels it can be, whether they're small, large, a city or whatever. Make sure that language is clear that our intent is to hit the targeted Prop 47 population and will honor all requests, but not define exactly what that is until later on in the process internally. And so if we decide, well, in order to do this right, we need to do regional or something, but not make that part of the RFP, and then is that possible, or is that something we have to predefine?
you know, off the top of my head, I think predefined is gonna be much clearer and more objective, but we can think about that further.
I mean, my feedback to Richard's comment is if you show a huge need, let's just use Shasta as an example, that in comparison to other rural counties, you have such a high rate of incarceration and arrest and those with mental health and substance abuse issues, and you state that need incredibly clearly in the proposal, I don't think a body would be comparing your ability to leverage with that of Los Angeles. Like, I understand the point, but in an open competition, I think if you state the need and have a great kind of proposal to fix that need, at least as I rate proposals, I would rate your proposal. John, what was your
Yeah, I appreciate the comments that were said. My comment was not about political expediency. My comment is about recognizing the need to, the different needs that different jurisdictions have. The reality is that a county like Shasta, to make the decision to put an application forward requires pulling a full-time staff person for a period of time to do this in a county that probably doesn't have staff just available to do that. And if they don't view themselves as competitive, because it's an open competition, they will never apply. So we will never get to see what they could do. And just as a point of note, in the case of the Veterans Housing Bond money I talked about and that set aside, 48 counties out of 58 counties competed as one region, all the rural counties, for less than 10% of the pot. Okay, so we weren't talking like that there was some massive allocation for them. And so when we did these listening tours, I went to them all, and you go to Fresno, these other places, those are communities that want to have an investment that may not show. If we get to Scott's point, 300 applications and 60 of them are great, it'll be a lot easier for people in LA to show Skid Row could have 10 applications itself about the need to actually do something there. So I just would really, I'm hearing people say they want to do it differently, and that's fine. I'll go with what people want to do. I just would really critically evaluate. The opposite could happen, where you're not as small as a Shasta or a Butte County, but you still don't get funding because we haven't really determined what those metrics are. And I can guarantee you that there are a handful of places for which the need for this type of funding is so concentrated that we could just fund 2 or 3 spots in California alone and never fully fulfill that need. So that's my comment.
Can I get a show of hands? How many people around this table like the idea of an open competition at all? Raise your hand.
Can you define what you mean by set-asides, please?
So we've talked about the regional approach, letting one region compete against that region and not have to compete for a pot of money with the other regions. That would be a set-aside, because you have X $1 million for this region, or percent for this region, you have X for this region. So those within a region compete. That's a set-aside. An open competition is everyone just competes and we just grade them based on their proposals. Yes.
I would prefer an open competition for 2 reasons.
You didn't raise your hand.
One reason is I think I trust everybody in this room to understand what's at stake here, what the issues are. We understand, and I think we could make a committed effort, good faith effort to make sure that we distribute the funds around, because I do agree, people around the state are trying to undermine Prop 47, and a lot of these people trying to do that are these counties that we're talking about. However, we've talked extensively about not funding subpar proposals. And if we set aside for regions and everyone in that region got less than good, we're now bound to that set aside. And I just don't agree with that. And so I think there has to be a conscious effort made to make sure that we distribute the funds in a way that would help the state.
So I'm going to ask the question one more time. I'm going to ask the question one more time. Who in this group believes or favors an open competition with no set-asides whatsoever? Raise your hand. 1, 2. Frankie and Bonio. All right. Javier, you have a thought?
Yeah. I'm just wondering if it's through set-asides that you would handle something like, if there is a small region that clearly has the greatest need, based on the metrics that we come up with, but they don't have the capacity to submit the best proposal. Do we set aside for something like, is that done for a set aside where you say, okay, well, we're gonna help this county?
John?
So just to, I mean, I never thought I'd bring the veterans housing bond stuff in here this much, but what we also did was we put that minimum threshold requirement for scoring on each region. So if you didn't have to Frankie's concern, if you came from this rural set aside where you had 10% for, you know, this huge landmass in the state, and it didn't get a minimum scoring criteria, however you wanted to do that, it spilled over into that 25% pot, which was available to everybody, so it could just go to the next best funded, the next best scoring statewide. So you can still put a restriction on that. So guarantee if you get a quality application in one of those, they're guaranteed.
Got it. So I'd like to request that staff develop a regional plan, including John's comments right there, that there will be a minimum threshold that we'll determine after we score them. I'd like to move the conversation to caps.
One question on that. When you say regional, you mean generically, right?
They're gonna develop the plan and we'll see it.
But regional means something specific. So I don't know that we agree that it should be Northern California.
No. They'll develop that plan.
But it could be size of population or
Sure.
somewhere. Okay.
Sure. I'd love to talk about cap. Do we want to cap the amount that someone can apply for?
Different kind of question. Does the committee need a break?
I'd like to break right at the end of 11.
Okay, very good, Mr. Chair.
We're on a roll.
Say at the end of 11.
At the end of this. And by the way, and I want to be done with this at 11 as well. So at 11 and 11, we will break.
Yes.
Yes for the cap.
Item 11, Mr. Chair, I sincerely apologize. And my math professor, father, may he rest in peace, would be very upset. But I have to point out a calculation error on your grant funds available. The bottom line should say 34.36. It says 35. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I heard yeses for the cap. Is there anyone in this room that would like to advocate for no cap? John Bowders.
Could you repeat that? We were just chatting. Could you just repeat the question exactly?
The question is, I heard a lot of yeses and a lot of shaking of heads yes on a cap. Is there anyone in this room that would like to advocate for no cap?
Go ahead.
Well, my thing is, will it leave room for, let's say someone wants 2 million, but we can make the decision, just give them 1 based on need? I like flexibility, in other words.
No, you
can't do that?
You can do up to.
Up to?
Yeah.
I think up to.
Okay, up to.
Right, and the way that you would write it potentially in a RFP is, right up, request the amount of funds, up to amount of funds that you need, something to that effect.
But to be clear, whatever folks ask for, even with the cap, if we say we want this person, but we're not stuck to what they apply for.
You mean giving them more than they request?
No, less than.
Oh, less?
You haven't done that before.
Yeah, I thought that like when the folks apply for the paper success thing and counties ask for a certain amount.
So what could?
Oh, no, we just gave them less because they were the third rated county.
Right.
The first 2 got fully funded, the third got partial funding.
Yeah.
Just because they were, yeah.
Alameda.
Yeah, that proposal sucked.
We're still recording the meeting.
Are we saying the cap is going to be per year, or are we saying that the cap overall? I think we need to make that distinction.
You get to decide that. You have to say what you mean, but yes, it's an up to, and it's either per year or the funding will be spread over 3 years. Those are still decision points.
Okay.
To me, there's a pro and a con with the cap. The con is that we lose the potential to see what somebody really could do if we set an arbitrary cap. The pro is, to John's point, I mean, some people look at it as flexibility. You get these totally egregious applications where somebody says, I need $5 million to do this. And it's really hard. Then we have to figure out how much do they really need. So I don't know if there's a way to metric or score that to keep them reined in. I know that when DSS put out an RFP for one of their programs, I was telling Scott this earlier, an unnamed county applied for $10 million of funding less than a third of what they asked for, and they didn't even spend that in the end. So you can imagine how much money would have been wasted. So it just, for me, I like the idea of not putting arbitrary dollar amounts on what people can do, but at the same time, I'm a little concerned that people will just frivolously put whatever they want.
Thank you. Can we just have like a soft cap where we say, for example, 3.5 million, but if you need more, please explain why?
Staff? I think we've done that before. Yeah. Do you remember, Ricardo? Okay.
Can I ask you, what would be the opposition to the firm number?
I mean, I'm just considering what John said is, we don't want to limit if somebody really has a really ambitious and stellar plan and they can do so much more with it and they can explain how that money will be used. I'd be open to considering that, but kind of as a marker saying cap is 3.5. If you need more, justify kind of that request.
I would rather see the cap lower just so that we can fund more programs. I know, and I'll use an example, the Burn JAG grant was around $1 million, and all of those funds pretty much went to expensive law enforcement type positions. I mean, I feel like with this grant, the higher it is, the more potential I feel that there are, unless we put some sort of limitations on the county government budget, that those funds are just going to go to governmental type. We put some limitations on that.
The other consideration too is, I mean, each of you could be kind of approaching this differently. You may already have in your own mind the types of things that you think may be funded. I don't think we've had that conversation, like if it's going to be systems change, or if in your minds as you're thinking about these caps or amounts, you're thinking, or they're going to do these much smaller approaches. So depending on how you're even approaching it, that number or that cap might mean something differently to you as well. So that's also another consideration.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like two different things. The cap is one thing, and then we still have to evaluate the RFPs when they come in to make sure that their budget is sound. So those are two different things. And if we really want to fund more, why not lower the cap to 3 million and take that $500,000 from each one and fund a whole other grantee?
Yep. Another thing you can consider too is the level of service that people are providing, and the number of services that they're providing, because that would determine the cap. So say if, for example, you're going to provide residential substance abuse treatment, that has a higher cost factor versus I'm going to provide case management and link people to services, right? So if you look at those two different models, the amount of money that would be needed maybe for intensive residential treatment for 90 days per person is going to be pretty significant. Case management, even if it's intensive, but you're linking them to resources in the community that are already in existence, that cost factor for that person is going to be much lower. So you're going to get proposals that could do both things, could look very different, very expensive, but getting this intensive residential versus not as expensive, but providing case management to link people to services. So when you get these proposals, you're going to have to think about that, because that is going to be widely different in the dollar amount and what they're doing.
Thanks, Christine. Shelley?
What we've done before with certain grants is have said that the typical grant amount is between X and Y, and justify if you want to go below or above that. So exactly what John was talking about, and that worked out just fine. And it gives people a benchmark, right, to think, okay, this is the general ballpark that I'm shooting for. And I guess I would recommend that we go even smaller than $1 million a year. I mean, what if we started out at $500,000 a year? And again, just to spread the money out further among different, because I think, $1 million a year for a community-based organization is a lot of money, right? Tons of money. And so I think it goes to Stephanie's point. We're going to attract, more government entities if it's these higher dollar amounts, but if we keep it lower, I think it's sending a clear message that this money is meant to get out to the CBOs and not to either the traditional big service providers or, government entities.
Ricardo, do you think you have enough feedback on the cap, or do you have any clarifying questions you want to ask?
Well, so do I hear consensus around the notion of a range? what, kind of to Shelley's point, that the sort of a benchmark range between X and Y. I'm not a committee member, but still really persuaded by Christine's point that you may have absolutely great proposals that have expensive things in them, like we're going to support transitional housing for a lot of people. So I personally would urge, well, we'll give you a recommendation just to let you know that includes a rather high up to.
Yes. Ricardo, as we look at the rest of 11, a lot of very kind of more technical questions. Which ones would you want to get feedback from the committee on, or do you guys want to try to draft something? I think I definitely want to talk real quick about budget, which is I with the committee. Any others that?
F.
Okay, so let's talk about leveraging and then budget. So how can the proposals leverage federal, state, and local funds or other social investments such as the following? You have the list. How do we want to see the proposals do that, or prove that to us, or show that to us?
I have a statement to make. The Medi-Cal waiver, those are not ineffective right now. The counties are currently applying, or they haven't been implemented. So I know that they're in the process of applying, and then, which is a long time process. And then, so the implementation could be for some people a couple years. So even though we had, some discussion around the drug Medi-Cal waiver and counties are going to be able to leverage that funding, I just want everybody to be aware that not every county maybe do that, and also that it might be a few years before you actually see any impact on that particular leveraging.
I think we're getting close in some of the Bay Area counties where they actually can start doing those services, but because they're doing this in phases, like the Northern California counties, you're right, it could be a couple of years before they are able to, really provide those services. But I think it would be, to ask in the question, how are you going to leverage, these other funds? I mean, I think we should ask the question of applicants, where they, how they're gonna do this, because, a lot of counties are developing implementation plans for the drug Medi-Cal program.
How do we lead them towards clarity and making sure they're clear in exactly what different funds are leveraging, how much they're leveraging, how much of this is new money that's not money they're already spending? Like, how do we just make sure that we ask for the right amount of detail?
Well, I mean, if I'm San Mateo County, and I would say in the answer, we are within a few months of implementing full drug Medi-Cal benefits. We've we anticipate we'll serve this many clients. We've negotiated these rates. I mean, they can explain all that.
I mean, most of the counties have to have a plan. The plan's got to be approved. I mean, there's a lot of documentation around that particular thing. I don't know if we want to ask them for all their plan or their strategic plan, because I'm telling you, it's
right.
Pages and pages.
I just want to make sure they're leveraging new dollars for this, not just trying to make us think they are, but they're really just using what they are already giving every year. I want to make sure we know that they're willing to commit something new to the pot to supplement this grant. Go ahead.
Katie, I think it may be helpful to bring item H into this conversation as well, the issue of requiring a match. I think that if the RFP is really strong on the leveraging component, maybe you'd want to make it easy for an applicant to show their in-kind match is coming through leveraging and not require the traditional match of 5% or some other percent that the grantee would put in. The staff recommendation.
I really like that idea. One of the things that I find a lot of times with the traditional in-kind match is it's things that you're already doing and already absorbing. It's really not new stuff that you're putting to enhance the program. So I really like that idea.
I just want to make sure that everybody has skin in the game in a real way, whether it's a traditional 5% match or it's them leveraging in a new way that they have proven to us that they are investing something that has not been invested before.
And it's gonna be the primary government applicant that will be responsible for leveraging and matching, not the CBOs.
That's
right.
Okay, that was gonna be my question.
Yeah. Okay, on the budget. I mean, to me, the budget is always the telltale sign if someone's real or not. So I'd love to look at what the burn jag budget template looked like. That was very helpful to me in rating. I'd also like just clarity in the budget of how much is actually being passed to community-based organizations very clearly, very easy to access and read. If we need more information on that, we can dig deeper, but in one page, we're getting $800,000 of grant money and we're passing $603,000 to community-based organizations, and this is what it looks like. I just want to make sure that's very clear.
Right, and to answer your first part about the burn jag, where it says standard line items, the verbiage that's there, that's pretty much stock, which would be included in jag. Maybe some of the words are a little bit different, but we can customize that and you'll get that. And as far as the pass-through, there'll be a specific line item, and then there's usually some type of narrative description for each supporting component.
So going back to an earlier comment I made yesterday, I'm not sure how the body feels, but can we limit how much can go to governmental agencies and how much to non-governmental agencies?
Sure we can.
You can. I think yesterday, I don't know that you guys completely agreed. I think we heard at one point 50% and 20%, and then it just kind of was left hanging. So
And couldn't we come out and just say, priority will be given to projects that fund, demonstrate clear commitment to community-based organizations, or something that vague, that provides the flexibility that we need in the event that you've got, an application that comes in and they want to, the county wants to hire a staff person whose job it is to coordinate all the CBOs. And I guess I just wouldn't want to preclude a government entity being able to hire someone if they're really it's clear from their budget, it's clear from their project narrative that they're gonna be furthering the purpose of the program itself.
Shelley, I just want to ask a clarifying prompt. So what you're saying is that not necessarily focus on a specific percentage that's passed through, but put the impetus back on them to explain. Got it. Thank you.
If I can just add to that too. In Oakland, me and a lot of my colleagues, when we organize our Prop 47 reclass events, we found out quickly how important, how essential it is, how crucial it is to provide a safe space for the folks who want to avail themselves of the services. So often you have entities already in place who say, well, hey, I'm already doing this work, come see me. And that's the type of attitude that turns people off. So at the end of the day, and going to Sammy's point, in terms of making sure that folks, we're talking about inter-recidivism, we're talking about helping people, meeting them where they at. I think it's important that this funding go to the folks who are doing exactly that. So that way we're not just repeating what's already in existence.
And just one other point of clarity we should have mentioned. Scott earlier mentioned rating. And I think yesterday Katie touched on it a little bit as well. Once we get to a sufficient point in this process, obviously you guys will be heavily involved in that. But when it comes time to allocate percentages or weights, whatever verbiage makes the most sense to you, you will have a chance to then put a percentage, for that or value for that particular category. So if, just using 100 point, percentage, if you think it's worth 35, percentage points, that would be reflected in the RFP, and then they would know upfront, okay, this is ranked this much by this ESC, and that's another way that they then interpret the plan. So just to point out the obvious.
Would we know the types of funding that counties are getting already from the BSCC? Is that, made available or not?
You would want to request potentially in the application that they list other funding streams that they have? Is that where you're getting?
No, I don't know. I'm just wondering, like, if a county, for example, is receiving some funds, and I guess because of the I guess the leveraging and the pass-through money and
Yeah.
I feel like that would add some valuable information.
I think it would be easy to include in the RFP a request for them to list what other grants they're presently receiving. And then on the flip side of the same question, it's very easy for us to provide you with a listing of who's getting Burn Jag funding, who's getting CalGRIP funding, and so forth. That's no problem.
I have a question. Would that include AB 109 funding as well?
We don't administer that funding, but we can easily provide those numbers to you. I think it starts to complicate the issues, but that information is certainly available, Sonia.
In terms of evaluation, it might be helpful to see what types of criminal justice funding is coming to counties and how they're using it.
Tom, I'd love for you to be the last comment before our
Okay.
11 a.m. break.
Just going back to the question about governmental versus non-governmental, I think rather than framing it that way, maybe have, like, I kind of agree with Shelley that, we put language in about that the funding goes to the, who's actually delivering the direct services. Most large counties contract out their services with community-based organizations. The county staff just are pretty much administrative, but there's smaller counties where the people actually doing the drug treatment counseling are county staff. They just don't have that many providers, and so the counties are actually the ones that are doing the direct services. So having it framed in a way that the money should go to those who are providing the direct services rather than government versus non-government.
Scott, I just want to say one quick thing.
Yeah.
We should also think about if there's things that we would say we would not want to fund, such as I want to purchase a vehicle, or, you know what I mean? I've seen that in other proposals. So that's just something else that we should consider.
I want to take a break. Chief James, last comments.
I'm sorry, just one thing, and I know I'm kind of hung up on this, but if we say something like who's providing direct services, in a county, we could provide every service. We don't need to actually go out to the community-based organizations. We could do substance abuse treatment, we could do mental health treatment, we could do case
That's right.
management, we could do housing, we could do everything if we wanted to. And I really think that the intent of this is not for counties to get the funds. It really isn't. So I know we can say in there, we encourage, but I don't think we'll see really the results that we're looking for unless we really specify as
Amen.
part of the
I
budget.
completely agree with that.
Amen. We'll take a 10-minute break. 11:10, we'll be back. reconvene. Let's reconvene. And I'm going to turn to page 18. And we are going to start with number 13, pre-qualification process. And I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for that last conversation. Very helpful. We're going to skip ahead to something and then come back. We said we would go back to the prior section, but we want to try to make it a little bit cleaner. So for in the interest of maximizing our time together, we're going to go ahead to the pre-qualification process, some of the decisions that we want you to get into. So with the pre-qualification process, which is on page 18 if you're following along, we're making an assumption, and the assumption is that there will be a significant amount of proposals. And typically, what we do is we have the body read all the proposals. We haven't gotten to page lengths or any of those other details quite as yet, but you can imagine that it would be quite voluminous. So one of the things that staff has recommended is that we have each grant provide a grant summary, so to speak. And that summary would be no more than 5 pages. And the thought process behind is that you guys are going to, in fact, read all of them. And then on top of that, we wanted to establish some really basic criterion. So in that pre-qualification, for example, we would make sure that they were an eligible applicant. So for example, a lead public agency, that minimum requirements are met. So for example, that they're addressing mental health, substance abuse, diversion, things of that nature. And then any other topics that you guys wanted to include in this developmental process. And also kind of flag that they certainly couldn't exceed any limits or thresholds that you guys have agreed on. And some of that feeds into our prior conversation. And so along those lines, you've heard us talk a lot about ranges and scales. And so to help you in that initial process, you can see there's an example there that has a 0 to 3 range. And so what you would in fact be doing would be scoring that 5-page grant summary on this, on this scale that's there as a recommended option, with 0 being not met, 1 being partially met, 2 fully met, 3 exceeded, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the overview. So I guess our first kind of initial question for you is, does that pre-qualification process outlined above, will that work for you? Are you comfortable having a 5-page summary? Bear in mind, you have to read the 5-page summary, and then you still have to read the actual proposals at some point, but this would just make it a lot more manageable for you.
And this is probably clear, but at some point, what we would do is set an initial deadline for all of you to submit your pre-qual scores. We would do that calculation and then tell you which proposals you need to read the whole proposal on. So it's really to manage your time and with your help, cull out those proposals that just don't warrant full consideration. Every applicant has to turn in the short summary and the full proposal, so there's no going back to the field. It all comes in at the same time.
So we would be doing the scoring individually and elsewhere.
Yes, correct.
I have a question. I'm not really, I guess. Are you saying we will give them a score just based on the overview, and assuming it's 0, still have to read the rest of it?
You will not. So all of you will get all of the applications. And in fact, we can talk about the logistics of how you want to receive those. Your first pass is only going to be on the 5-page summary. And if you thought something was a 0 and didn't meet what you were looking for at all, somebody else thought it was a 3, we're going to average those out. So we'll have the committee input, and then we'll have a line below which you agree you only want to read the ones above that line.
And then at that point, you follow up with us, let us know which was made the cut, and then we proceed to read full applications at that point. Okay, thank you.
Any concerns about that? Does that seem clear and something that's reasonable? All right, great. Seems like there's a lot of agreement there. So then on to the second part, which may be a little bit, I guess, a little awkward at this point because we haven't really gone through all these specifics, but some of the general things that we tend to include, for example, it's this project description, goals and objectives, budget table and narrative, letters of agreement. Are there certain things, are there any additional things that you would want to see included in that grant summary? And bear in mind, once again, it's meant to be this high arching 5-page overview.
And to be fair, we do extensive training, and again, Tony Jackson, whom you've met, will walk you through all of this. You would need to base that initial decision only on the 5-page summary. And we might want even want to hold back sending you all the proposals until you know which make the first cut, because it really has to be a fair, competitive process. So everybody gets evaluated first only on the budget summary, and we'll be really strict on this. We will inform applicants you need to number your pages. The committee will read 1 through 5. They will stop at 5. And if they can't convince you in those 5 pages that this is a proposal you want to look deeper into, then they don't make it. And so that's really just to manage the workload.
So a few of us have talked about the importance of prioritizing where the greatest need is. How would you include that in the 5-page?
We could identify in the project description. I think we have some ideas on this as your staff, which you'll tell us if we're on the right track. But you could have, as part of the project need, a statement of the population to be served, the effects, a demographic sketch, whatever it is you want. You could put that as part of the project need within the 5-page summary.
On the 5-page summary, I would like to condense, I don't want the agency, the public agency necessarily to go on and on describing themselves. We want the focus to be on what is the intervention that they're going to be providing. Because I've seen proposals where 2 or 3 pages is all about the agency and the history and, how many people, work at their agency. I don't think that that's where the focus should be. So for us to be able to read the summary, we want to walk away with a good understanding of what they're going to do. So.
Absolutely agree. And that's why we feel like the 5 pages needs to sell you on that.
Will the budget table be clear to us, like where the funds are actually going to which agency?
Yes, as Scott was asking about earlier, and you'll get to see this, and you can fine tune it as needed, but it'll be both a budget table and a budget narrative. So things like what are the direct services that are going to be provided, at what dollar amounts and so forth. You can see that right there, and then you'll read the budget narrative as well. And a short budget narrative, but maybe a page would go to that. The budget table would count for a page, and then you only have 3 more to work with. Again, we're trying to limit your work, and if this is making you nervous and you want a little bit more information, we can fine tune that as well. But we just wanted to start with this proposal in anticipation of a very large number of applications, but of course, we're still not sure. Will you get your reading? No.
What's making me nervous is my complete ignorance and lack of experience with this kind of process. When is the training occurring?
On the rating?
We're getting training on how to score.
Yes, at the, which recorded it?
So we actually haven't picked those dates quite yet. So the next couple of stages will resemble something loosely of, once we've got a draft of this, these 2 days together, we'll come back and we'll reconvene to develop rating criteria. And then through that process, then you'll also be trained at a subsequent meeting on then how to rank and read those proposals in a consistent manner. So those are maybe, it's another 2 meetings away.
Okay, I mean, Katie emphasized we were going to get training.
Yeah, yes, you will.
Okay,
you will.
Thank you.
Actually, John was first.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, related to Christine's comment regarding the intervention services that they're going to be offered, is there an opportunity to figure out or to ask what the rationale is for that?
I think that's part of project need for sure.
Okay, yeah, okay.
I would just ask, we might sometimes take this at an assumptive level, but with the budget table and narrative, especially when it comes to saying we're going to hire this person, we're going to hire at 5 FTE. I think it needs to be clear where the staff is going. Is that a person at a county agency? Is that a person at a CBO? And I also think that when they put titles like we're going to have resource navigator, that sounds like a great person, right? But it could not mean what we think it means. And so descriptions, not just titles in the narrative. Sometimes we just let them put, this is the title. I think they need to describe any position.
Any other comments on this section? Okay.
One question. So it was stated as, I'm trying to find that line, but can require applicants to identify who they are going to serve and why. That is important, but that doesn't tell us where the greatest need is. And will that be determined through some other means, or are we asking them? Like, will we be able to know, like, for example, Salinas has, you know, this percentage of crime, of victims, of when we talk about where the greatest need is, right? When we talk about where the greatest needs, at what point will we be informed?
I think, Javier, that question is probably best answered by, do you want to ask the applicants to provide you with a statement of need? Well, how much structure do you want to give to the applicants in responding to the statement of need? Because you could ask closed-ended questions, you know, about things like arrest rates or other criteria that you would identify, or you could leave it wide open and say, what is your greatest need? How do you define that, and so forth. So I think that's a decision point for the committee.
Part of that, what I would assume would be like how this is going to affect the recidivism rate. Yeah. And I would also further that thought, would assume that also is going to suggest that that would be part of the evaluation matrix. That's okay.
Are we going to have a standardized definition of whether it's recidivism?
I would move
Are we
for
going to use the
ESC one.
BSCCs? You know, I just want to be clear about that, because every entity has a little bit of a difference of opinion about what is recidivism.
Yeah, actually, I think it's actually called out specifically the BSCC definition. So, yeah. Good work, Shelley. It's in the statute. And shameless plug for the BSCC, Shelley and a whole bunch of other folks worked really hard to come up with that definition, so.
All right, are we ready to move on to the next section?
How about in the summary, if we'd ask them to, you know, address the guiding principles, how they plan to address the guiding principles, because that sort of gives you a more broad overview.
Maybe it'll be an 8-page summary, I don't know.
Great. Right. So Ricardo?
I believe staff would like to go back to the grant cycle question. Would that be okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Can everyone read this, or is the green pen hard to read? So we've listed, thank you, Steve, we've kind of reframed the options up here, A, B, and C. We've got it in.
Colin, we need to get your mic. Yeah, can you use yours? Okay.
I apologize for missing the beginning of the meeting. I was in Chicago. My family got stuck on a Delta flight and was laid over for 3.5 hours last night and got in at 5 this morning. So, I'm missing, staff will help me because I obviously missed a lot of the context of this discussion. But we've laid out 3 options here, similar to the ones that are in the issue paper. We just laid them out in a little bit of a different way. Option A, B, and C, and looking at year 1, 2, 3, and 4. Under option A, you would award grants to 30 of the applicants. In year 2, those same 30 would get the money. In year 3, those same 30 would get the money. So they would have a year to spend here, a year to spend this money, and a year to spend this money. And then in year 4, we would issue a new RFP.
Colleen, can I ask you a point of
Yes.
clarification? What is the money?
The entire Prop 47 allocation. So here, this year, we're working with 35 million. And these numbers, these are just here as placeholders, totally made up numbers.
Right. No, but so my point is year 1A, 30 grantee, hypothetically, 30 grantees getting 34.36 million.
Yes, so each grantee would be getting 1 point something million.
Okay. And
They
then
would get that 1 point something million here in year 2 and 1 point something in year 3. So the total grant would be close to 4 million.
Right.
The total grant over 3 years.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
that does, but we won't be able to say definitively what the year 2 contract would be because the legislature.
Because we don't know the amount, correct, right? So whatever we would have to come up with some kind of formula, and then whatever the year 2 allocation is proportionately allocated to those 30 on the same formula as we allocated in year 1.
And because I think I'm hearing, so this way, it's an even amount. Is there any way it can be done like maybe one person get 800, the other one get 1.2?
Well, actually, you know what, we kind of separated out the grant cycle from the funding discussion. And I think what we'll probably have to do is go to the funding discussion and then come back and revisit this. Because when you talk about funding, you will be potentially setting caps. So an applicant can apply for up to 800, 1 million, 5 million, whatever you set there as the cap. And then they can apply up to that. So, we won't know exactly how many we'll be able to fund. It will be dependent on how much the top rated applicants ask for.
Yeah, because I was asking that because it will become complicated year 2 and year 3 since we don't know that number.
It will be. It will be. They would potentially have to, if we get less money, we'll have to reduce their allocation proportionately across the 30. And then they may have to submit a revised budget depending on how much the cut is.
Exactly.
I have a quick question. Can they carry the funds over year to year?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
This
because
is
you're
continuously-
assuming that you might not be able to spend all the money in year 1, but if they could carry it over to year 2, that could be beneficial for that agency, even though the overall we're thinking is going to be reduced at this
It's
time.
sometimes with state funds, we have difficulty doing that, but these funds are special funds
They're
and we will be able to do that.
continuously appropriated, so we're very fortunate in that regard that the funding will carry over to the second year.
May I ask a question, Colleen, related to that? It seems to me like option A is the least competitive. And this, right? And
Well,
well, I think that it doesn't increase, like C to me seems like it would be, like it would increase competitiveness amongst the.
I think too, if you look here we end up getting to 30 applicants in the 3-year, let's say we have a 3-year cycle, we end up getting to 30. Here we end up getting to 30 potentially as well. Fewer grantees, more money for each grantee. Less money for each grantee here.
They're all 30 though. Yeah. They're all the same.
So that's where the dollar.
But I think
amounts
what
are
he
gonna-
means is that it's more competitive for multiple years, where option A is competitive just the first year, and after that, it's not competitive.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. That's
Well, it
correct.
depends on how we pick these new grants. So I know one of the options called for using the same ranked list that we developed from this RFP and then just moving down that list. So awarding the top 10 in year 1, awarding 11 through 20 in year 2.
You know what I like about C? That hybrid approach is that you get your 15 in year 1, and then those that didn't make it get to reapply and take a second stab. And it really lets us see a second round and see people improve their proposals. And then once we've really locked it in with those first 15, and then we did a second round with the second 15, we allow those 30 to continue in year 3. I find C really dynamic.
So the assumption then is that we would reissue the RFP in year 2, the same RFP.
I would say we reissue a same or very similar RFP in year 2 and allow those who did not get funded in year 1 to reapply if they choose. And we have new people who either were not ready or for some reason didn't apply as well in year 2. And let us see those proposals we remember back as well as new proposals that we don't remember, and now see how they compete a year after us seeing everything play out.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
And I just want to clarify though, real quick, on that option, that means all of you come back next year and score again, a new set of we potentially reissue the RFP, get a new set of applicants, and then you go through this again. Just to clarify.
I think that the way that I'm looking at it, there are 2 pieces to the work that we're doing here, right? Both equally as important. One is to make sure that money is not being squandered. Make sure that money is not being squandered and that it gets to the right people. But I think that it's been mentioned a couple of times that hopefully we're going to be able to identify a lot of good people doing great work through the first cycle, right? And so then the focus is what model helps them do their work the best? What model would help the grantee succeed? And I think A might be that.
I have a question about C. So if Model C were done, the first group of grantees would be 15. So we bring in new grantees the second year. So would year 1 grantees be funded in years 2 and 3? Okay.
Can somebody clarify what C year 3 means 30 same? Why wouldn't we just do? But why wouldn't we just do a new RFP every single year other than the workload concern?
I think that's to make sure that the funding is available to fund those services for 3 years. We can't add in new grantees because we've determined that the dollar amount you want to use needs to be, the year 1 pot goes to 15, the year 2 pot goes to the next 15, and then the year 3 pot continues them. I mean, and I hope all of that divvying up works.
Yeah, I just think, at this point in time, projecting out what's going to happen in year 3 is going to be really challenging for this committee. So there might be a ton more money, there might be less money. I mean, it's really hard to be able to go that far in the future. So that's why we said that in my mind, I was thinking it would make more sense to do figure out what the funding is before we release a new RFP.
Frankie Guzman?
Yes, I have a question about C as well. So first year, C group gets 35 million cut across 15 groups. In year 2, it's a separate C group that will get maybe a lesser amount than 35 cut across 15, but that means A group has to make their 1/15th last 2 years.
Correct. This assumption assumes that. And then I wanted to clarify too, then when the year 3 money comes in, so these guys will be on their 3rd year. Do they just have the 1 year to spend it, do you foresee, or?
No,
so they're overlapping 3-year cycles.
Overlapping 3-year cycles. Scott, real quick. Do I hear very little interest for B from this group?
No, I like B the best, because B is a new RFP.
Can we take a vote by letter just to see where we're at? Can we just say A, raise hands, B?
Okay, here we go. We're gonna take a letter vote. No questions until afterwards. 1 second, Big John.
Seriously, it's important.
Everyone has a clarifying question.
No, I mean, I can't make a decision.
Okay, go.
Real quick. So at the end of 3 years, we determine 3-year cycles for A, B, and C. At the end of 3 years, are we saying if the folks have been performing efficiently, they keep that, or that's it and it's a new group?
New RFP.
Right, so they can reapply, so they're eligible to continue or are they done?
Yep.
There'll always be a new RFP in year 4.
Okay, just wanna make sure.
But that's a great question. Will these people they'll still have an active grant when this new RFP comes out. They'll be finishing up their 3rd year. Will they be allowed to apply? That's a question for you all to decide.
Yeah, we don't need to decide that right now.
Can we vote for more than one?
I'm making a motion.
No, you can only vote for one. Stephanie, hold on one second. Let's vote. Let's vote.
Does nobody like C? I don't like C.
I like C. All right.
This is a straw poll. This is not a final decision. Can we clarify option B? Is option B moving down the ranked list? No. That's not up here at all. Okay, got it.
So with B and C, you're still gonna have overlapping contracts.
Yes.
By the time you get to the new
Absolutely. All votes for A, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 for A. All votes for B, raise their hand.
You have 2 members on the phone?
2 for B. No, you can't vote twice, Stephanie. 2 for B. All for C. 1, 2. 2 for C. 3 for C. Who was the third? Scott, Tom, and Sammy. Okay, and on the phone?
I'm option A,
Charity. Okay. Leticia?
no strong preference at this time.
Great. A is the one.
Which one breeds the most competition?
I think, I've been wanting to make this point for a little while here. My concern about C, and I'll come back to my thoughts on that, Sammy. Because of the timing that all of this next year, we're gonna be in development. If you make awards based on your best applications in year 1, then you have a lag before you can award year 2 because you have to put an RFP out in the field. I think you need to leave, I would suggest you leave as an open decision point in the unlikely scenario that you don't have a lot of high quality applications, by all means. And please understand, we're willing to administer this in whatever way this committee directs. But in the event that you have a lot of really strong applications, then depending on how you want to divide up the money, you can do your year 1, and then very shortly after your year 1 decisions are made, the year 2 funding comes in. So only if you don't have a lot of quality applications do I think you should consider reissuing the RFP. I would think that would not be what the field would like to see. If they put all this work into really strong proposals and then we say, now you got to resubmit, that should be only if you're not happy with the pool you're looking at.
All right, so hold on one second. So staff, if you could develop the RFP around A, and we'll move forward in that direction.
Well,
Next.
I want to ask a question. It probably reflects my ignorance. But why don't we start across the top with 30 grants, 30 grants, 30 grants, and understand how we proceed through the process? Why do we start with 30 grants versus 10 grants versus 15 grants? I don't get it.
That's a good question, because I think the numbers are any number can be plugged into any one of these scenarios, really. That's going to come into play. The number of grants that you're able to fund will be determined by the funding caps that you set. So, good point. We can come up with any number. If you want to only award, 10 grants, 5 grants, 20 grants, that we can
We're
decide that.
not setting the number, we're setting the structure.
Judge, I think I get your question because it creates the optic of more people getting funded early.
Exactly.
I totally get it. I think that the reason, and I won't speak for the BSCC, the way I took it though, was that it was to just, if we assume those other metrics are imposed on it, like we have a cap that's continuous throughout any one of these 3 structures, it would roughly come out to 30 groups, right? And so that's how they've divided it for our way of thinking about when does the new people come in. But I totally hear what you're saying, because it makes it look like more people get funded earlier in one model versus the other, which doesn't necessarily have to be the
And that's
case.
actually why we left numbers off of the example in the issue paper, because the numbers really are not relevant to this discussion.
We're also looking at, in column A, that isn't 35, I'm just gonna pick a number, it isn't 35 million, it's 35 million year one. X number, maybe, let's just say it's even 35 million year two, 35 million, we're looking at 105 million as opposed to this 35 million, so we can hit with bigger grants. So instead of getting $1 million over 3 years, you get $1 million first year, $1 million second year, so the pot's bigger, so we can have more applicants.
But that's also, I guess, for me, is that regardless if this is irrespective if they do anything with the money, right? Like they're gonna be, it's the same folks every year for 3 years, regardless if they do anything, if they do anything with that money or not, right? So that's the assumption that there's not gonna be new submissions. Those same.
But we did say we would have the evaluation after year 2, and be able to.
So at that point, would we issue out a new RFP then? If they're not performing, or we just.
I would recommend to that point, if at the end of year 2, we have someone who's not performing, since we're not going to issue an RFP for 1 year in the balance year, and we don't want to start having random people off sync, I would say that the balance rolls into the next RFP and is available for the following year. So we would rather not waste the money, right? But at the same time, you aren't going to do a 1-year RFP or have one grant recipient on their own cycle and convene us just to pick one grant, right? So if to your point, we give $2 million to community X, or 3 million, make it easy. And then after year 2, they've spent 2 million of it, but like no outcomes to show for it. Nobody's improved because of this. We keep the last million and it rolls over because this is a continuous appropriation. We just add it to year 4 for the new RFP and it's available for that pot to go back out.
So Katie, can you go through what year 2 and year 3 funding are? Because at this point, it's not set though, right? So we're gonna ask people to develop.
These are estimates, of course, subject to change. I just need to find my correct page here.
So then they'll have to do budget modifications, because what if next year the legislature comes forward and says, actually, we've changed our minds, we're doing $100 million.
Right.
And then lo and behold, those 30 grantees are gonna get $100 million.
Right. Or you might want to come back and do something different.
That's what I was
You have a whole
gonna
lot
ask.
more to work with.
Yeah.
I would assume you'd want to come back together and decide how to proceed. But we haven't yet calculated the removal of up to 5% for BSDC administrative costs, which I don't know exactly what that's going to be. But this year, it's just about 34 million, so the 24 plus the additional 10. Next year, it's going to be about 28 million, and the third year about 40 million estimates.
All right, let's move on. Ricardo, where are we next?
The technical review, and Daryl's gonna lead us in this section.
Section 14, page 19. And we will take our lunch break after this section. After the technical review, we'll take our 15-minute, grab your lunch and come back and work.
The technical review is basically done by the staff. Once all the proposals come in, we take a short look at the actual proposal. And in looking at the proposal, we're looking for specific things with regard to the font spacing, pages, number of pages, making sure that all the signatures are proper, and so on and so forth. However, this body needs to take a look at, is there anything else that you want staff to take a look at as far as the technical review is concerned?
Could staff tell us what might normally be added to this category?
Excuse me?
Can you state what other things we might consider to add to this list of technical things?
What we have written here has to do with the pre-qualification process. We can look at that point and make a determination. Did the proposal meet that actual qualification? It's totally up to the body to.
Can I add something? So I think what we're looking at here is, do you want us simply to do the a real administrative level technical review, or will there be, do you anticipate there may be programmatic things you want us to look at to screen out? And I'll give you an example with the Strengthening Law Enforcement and Community Relations Grant. The ESC, they had come to a decision using the President's Report on 20th Century Policing that the applicants had to address pillar 1 in that report and one other pillar. And they came back and said, we hope that you would screen the proposals based on whether they did in fact address those two pillars in their RFP. If they didn't address the 2 pillars, we didn't even want to read the proposal. So it's how much do you want us to go beyond just a technical review?
Is there a way to do some kind of fact checking? So say an organization puts forward a proposal and says, we're going to work with these 3 nonprofits. Is there a way that you can look and see if they are actually nonprofits?
This is,
Is that not technical?
It's not technical, and I'll just use the metaphor or the analogy that's been used many times before. It's kind of like instructions to the jury. So you need to work off the evidence that's before you in the proposal. And if you happen to know, that the car accident occurred at this intersection and that's a mile from your house, and no, people don't drive fast there, like that shouldn't influence your decision. And I understand the appeal of that, but in general, we say you have to work off what's on the page there in front of you.
So in terms of the technical part, so if the pre-qualification doesn't meet the technical, if there's something short, are we still going to review that summary for that one?
That's a great question, Bonia. We're gonna technical review the executive summary, whatever it is we're calling that, the short summary. If things could arguably be DQ'd, although we have a short period of time within which, we can at least contact the applicants. What if the easy example is, okay, we've looked at your budget page and it doesn't add up, you're $200,000 off. So of course we would give them the chance to fix that. But what if the budget page came in blank or something like that? We would want to give them the chance to fix it. And if they don't, I wouldn't want you to read a proposal that has left a budget page blank. So I would ask for direction from the committee on that.
And these grants or these proposals are going to be coming from county entities that have probably been doing this for a long time. So this might not be such a big issue.
Yeah.
We'll make sure, Daryl, that we don't get into a burn jag kerfuffle again. Javier.
I'm going back to something that I brought. So if we are going to take the executive or the grant proposal, the executive, at face value, is there another way to ensure how we get correct information on the impacted community, where the greatest need is? Because, you could put down on your paper, we're going to service all formerly incarcerated and all, but we really don't know what that means in
Javier, I think we're in a little bit of new territory here, so I'll take a risk. Because there are some available, consistently reported, publicly available that we can provide for you. We at the BSCC are responsible for putting this kind of information together. We have what we call county profiles. That includes, of course, basic demographic data is easy to get from Department of Finance, is what we would go to for county population numbers. We could provide for you a summary sheet that would include things like arrest rates over a designated period of time. Those are proxy measures, publicly available, consistently reported, that if you want, you can have. That's what I would say.
I think it would be helpful.
Can I ask a clarification question to Colleen regarding the pillars you were just mentioning? You gave an example. I'd like to know, why was that used as in the actual technical review of the grant?
Well, after I started to give that example, I started to pause because actually there was a little bit of miscommunication in that case between the ESC and us. We typically don't delve into the content of the proposals as staff. We just look at margins and fonts and real technical things. And the ESC came back and said, no, we would have wanted you to have, DQ'd proposals that didn't address those two proposals, those two pillars. What we found in looking at the proposals is they all had addressed the two pillars, at least two pillars, so it was a non-issue. I think as staff, we would have felt uncomfortable making that kind of determination because that's typically something we rely on the ESC to do. But I mean, I threw that out as an example of something that's beyond just technical that could be a part of this screening process if you choose.
It seems to me like there was a reason for that. Is that because of this overlapping national initiative as well, or is that because this is asking a governmental body to do something different than it had in the past, or what was it?
The group just felt really strongly about having the applicants adhere to the pillars in that report.
Richard, I think you have a question? You didn't?
I just want to add something really quickly though to that point. So one of the things that we can do to, and it kind of supports what Colleen was saying, and we're hoping it will make easier for you is in that pre-qual. So for example, mental health, substance abuse, diversion, one of the things that we've talked about is having them state on what page are you addressing this, so that you don't have to go and fish through and say, is this portion addressing this particular element? And we're hoping that that will make it a little bit easier, because what we really want to do as staff is not be put in a position where we're trying to interpret something. We want to make it as consistent as possible so that by the time that it arrives at your desk, that it's met some level of quality assurance that we've all agreed upon.
Katie, would you mind amplifying your jury instruction analogy?
Sure. So, as I understand it, Judge, instructions would be given to a jury that they must make their decision. Well, I'm just talking about evidence here. They must make their decision based on the evidence that has been presented in this case and, deemed as.
Evidence being what's in the application.
Yes, the evidence that is in the application. And I'm not going to check, 4800 Claremont Mesa Boulevard. Wait, there's no community-based organization there. That's just, we do have to take what we get from these applicants at face value. Now, the grant monitoring, the fact of the matter is there have been some terrible examples from grants over the years where a community-based organization is made up. It's nothing more than a PO box, and money is literally wasted. We can't have that, but we have good grant monitoring procedures to ensure that's not the case. It's sort of at the front end, when we're trying to just basically separate the wheat from the chaff, you can only go off of what you get on that 5-pager and not do your own independent, I'm gonna check and see whether I think this looks like a good community provider, community-based partner.
So
You're the jury.
you're the jury, yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna be tough, Judge, to be the jury. So lunches have arrived. We have the ability to take a 20-minute break right now. We will reconvene at 12:15 to move on to evidence-based practices. Talk to you then. 17, we're back on the record, Judge Eskin. Judge, do you want to address the group? All right, guys. So I want to give the floor for 3 minutes to Judge Eskin, who had some introductory remarks yesterday that I rushed him through with my 1-minute rule. And so let me defer the next few minutes to Judge Eskin.
I really felt shortchanged yesterday morning when Scott did that. And because each of you had spoken for much more than 1 minute back on June 23rd, and
you had to sit through it.
No. Shall I repeat the shortchanged comment?
There you go. We can hear you now.
And so after the public comment session yesterday, especially our last speaker, whose comments were incredibly moving to me, I imposed on Scott and asked him to indulge me to address you all. I continue to be amazed by all of you and how much I'm learning from you. Should grant applicants who consider the contributions of those who've had the experience of incarceration be rewarded for recognizing the value of their experience? In my opinion, absolutely. Does that represent the view from the bench? No. I'm a member of the California Judges Association Executive Board, but the views I express are only mine. Years ago, when I suggested to my judicial colleagues that we invite attorneys and others with an interest in the operation of the courts to public meetings, my recommendation was rejected as simply inviting gripe sessions. Judges, by and large, are inclined to defend the status quo. And AB 109 and Prop 47 represent two major steps toward correcting, Sammy's referred to this, correcting the grievous errors of the past 30 years and the failed experiment with lengthy terms of incarceration. A visit to Portugal and a visit to Scandinavia with my wife, State Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson, confirmed my belief that we must work for significant cultural changes to our characterization of the conduct that justifies criminal sanctions, which was demonstrated so dramatically by yesterday's last public speaker. I messed up and therefore faced incarceration. I mean, that should cause all of us to step back and say, why? People in Scandinavia who engage in behavior that's annoying or represents a disturbance or is self-destructive are not arrested. If they're intoxicated and disturbing the peace, they're taken to a safe place. If they possess drugs for personal use and exhibit signs of addiction, they're taken to treatment facilities. Terms of incarceration for crimes of violence are not lengthy there, and an emphasis is placed on re-entry from the beginning, recognizing that whether it's tomorrow or next week or next month or next year, the prisoner will be released to society, and he or she better have the education, job training, treatment, housing, and emotional support to succeed. The recidivism rates in those countries pale in comparison to ours. Although it's beyond the purview of our work as the Prop 47 ESC, we should constantly keep in mind what we can contribute to changing the culture by asking why we don't shift the investment of our public resources from police, courts, and jails and into mental health and public health facilities. People who have the illness of addiction should not be taken to jail and should not have criminal records. Possession of drugs for personal use should not be labeled criminal conduct. Anyway, You've read if you've had the opportunity, read my biography, my professional background, you know what I've been doing for the last 50 plus years. But I also wanted you to know, aside from that, where I'm coming from in terms of values and principles. And I can't begin to tell you from the bottom of my heart how much I appreciate and how grateful I am for the opportunity to be exposed to people like Sammy and John and Vanya, and how valuable what they've had to say, and those of you who have the experience in dealing with grants and whatnot, and the lingo that you use. I mean, I'm just blown away by this opportunity, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Judge Estin.
Thank you, Scott.
Yes, Javier.
And Judge, I think that you brought up the last speaker from yesterday as an example, right? That somebody who messes up should not be facing incarceration.
Why do we think jail? Somebody said this. Why do we think jail?
Why do we think jail? Yeah, and I think that her story touched us all. And yesterday, I had the opportunity to touch bases with her very briefly. And while she shared her testimony yesterday, she mentioned something terrible happened and then I messed up, right? And I think that that's the case in almost all of the cases. And I asked her if she would be so generous to share a little bit about the terrible thing that happened, to make a point that, once somebody is labeled inmate or formerly incarcerated, many people and systems view them just as that, no longer consider them to be anything than that. And I asked her, and many of the people who oppose Prop 47 are people that will say, I oppose Prop 47 because I stand with the victims. And I think that the victims aren't getting enough support, and et cetera, et cetera. And for those of us who have worked inside, everybody agrees, right, that overwhelming majority, if not all, were victims before they hurt somebody else. And I wanted to just ask her if she would just take 2 minutes to really put a human face to this point.
Over years ago, the reason why I messed up and I went back to using was I was raped by 2 guys for 6.5 hours. I was doing very well. I had 2 jobs, a place to live, was doing everything that I was supposed to be doing until that happened. And I did mess up by using, but I didn't want to be around anybody. And my family, they tried, but they just didn't understand what I was going through. They'd never been through that experience. And at that point, I just wanted to shut myself off from everybody. Even though they wanted to be there, they just didn't know how to handle it. Neither did I. And, I wish there really was more support groups for victims. And it probably would have made it a lot easier. I had someone there holding my hand when I went through the rape kit process, but it just contacted them. They contacted me one other time to do it all over again, and I decided not to. Once was enough for me. I just didn't have a support group for victims that went through that.
Thank you so much. It's not easy to come up here and with a bunch of strangers share the most difficult part, but I really appreciate your courage and appreciate your willingness to do this, because anybody who would have gone through this experience and had not been in jail, nobody would have thought, okay, well, they're using drugs, let's send them back to jail, right? They would have seen you as somebody who had suffered in need of some support, in need of some healing. But that's the point that I wanted to make, that when we talk about funding organizations that work with people who have been victims of crime, and they want to separate certain type of victims from others, I encourage us to do whatever we can as a group to counter that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, quickly.
I'll be quick. I just thank you for, I know she's outside. I'm grateful she shared her story, but I just want to say something. I heard a couple of times I messed up. I want to be clear. She did not mess up. She was not the problem. And the root of this problem, we talk about the criminal justice system. In America, we have a need to criminalize people. We have a need to point the finger and say, you messed up. The reality is society felt it. Anytime a woman is something like that happens to a woman, something wrong with the society. And we're not doing enough to address, to correct these issues. So ultimately, I'm gonna end with this. Judge said it best. For me, the ultimate solution is divestment and reinvestment. We can no longer under-resource communities. We can no longer put human beings in some subhuman, inhumane conditions. And then by them being human, things happen. We say the problem's them. And I feel like the way that we deal with recidivism, what we're doing is we're telling people the society has failed these people. That's how people like us end up incarcerated. We send people like me back to the same communities, and we try to somehow program us to accept these subhuman conditions. That is not addressing recidivism, and ultimately the community is never made safe by doing that. So I know that we are tasked with a small thing to do here, but for me, what's so huge, what's so important is we have the opportunity to change the narrative around incarceration. We have the opportunity to advance, to humanize people, to recognize this is really about human beings. It's not about nothing other than that, because everything in society is supposed to be to keep us safe.
So John, thank you, John. Thank you, Javier. And is it Samantha? Is Samantha? Thank you to Samantha for, again, refocusing us on why we're here and why every decision here is so important. Let's move on to a topic that I know there's a lot of strong feelings about, and that is the question we need to answer now. Is the BSCC approach to evidence-based practice appropriate for this RFP? And I guess my first question to the BSCC staff is evidence-based programs and practice inclusive of promising programs? Colleen.
So we're on number 15 in the issue paper, page 20. And we very purposefully did not title this section evidence-based practice. We titled it promising, data-driven, and innovative approaches. Everyone cringes when they hear the word evidence-based program or evidence-based practice because it means different things to different people. But ultimately, I think a lot of people see it as, having to put together, having to implement a very name brand, off-the-shelf, in-a-box program that's been researched over 10 or 20 or 15 years, and those programs don't always fit with the need. And we recognize that at BSCC, and that's not the model we have adopted. So we have not adopted usually in our RFPs, we don't adopt any requirement that applicants use evidence-based programs. What we do focus on is a higher level approach, and we look at the principles of evidence-based practice. So what are the principles behind good implementation and evaluation? And so on page 20, you see we've laid out, this is language, we picked it up and dropped it in here. It's from another RFP. But basically, in a nutshell, the way we approach it is, can an applicant, has the applicant set goals? Have they set measurable goals? Do they have a plan to collect data? around what it is they're trying to do? Do they have a plan for measuring their outcomes? That would be the evaluation. And then do they have a plan for making adjustments if along the way they're not getting the results that they intended? So that's the way we've approached it at BSCC, unless legislation calls for something different. And in this case, it does not. I would say though that we know that people don't pluck, things out of thin air. And so there has been this expectation that as an applicant, you articulate why you selected a certain strategy. Did you see this strategy used somewhere else on a similar target population? Did it have success somewhere else? And, articulate that in the proposal. Why did you choose to go down this road? Or did you maybe pick a component of another evidence-based strategy you saw someone else doing? And so tell us why you selected that. And do you think it will work? Why do you think it will work? And how are you going to measure whether or not it did work? And that's in a nutshell, that's been the language that's been in the RFP. That's the standard that applicants have been held to. That's the standard that the ESCs have scored applicants on. So I say all that to invite you to read through this language. We can obviously modify this language in any way you want us to. And I'll open it there.
Is this another area where we want to reiterate that services be trauma-informed and culturally sensitive? Is evidence-based? I don't know if...
I think it could fit in this section. I wasn't here for your discussion around around the structure of service delivery. I would think it might fit in both places. We could somehow weave it into this section.
I think that would be a good idea.
Okay.
Tom?
Let me give you an example of why I think that is a good idea. In the Native American communities, sweats are often used as part of the drug treatment programs and are very effective, although they would not be considered an evidence-based practice, but yet they are effective in that population. Yeah. And so there is such a thing as practice-based evidence that I think we need to pay attention to.
Is this, and this section will follow into the evaluation section, but is everyone, I guess, in agreement that applicants somehow, whether we use these three factors here on page 20, but that they somehow are required to explain why they chose a certain strategy, explain how they plan to monitor it, collect data, and how they plan to evaluate it in the end?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think this looks good. The only question that I have though is the end of number 1, when we say with a similar problem. I don't know that I'm much more comfortable with similar target populations. So that within Native American communities, sweats might work or whatever the example is. But similar problem is a bit too broad, I think. But do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe it's not.
Well, I suppose, maybe the word problem is a problem. Thank you, Katie. For example, if they're targeting, well, it really does come to the population and the needs of the population and what are the needs. And
I think we meant program, you know what I mean? I think that's what the word problem was trying to get at, with a similar type of program and target population, which are two different things.
Franklin.
I just wanted to add, and I don't know if it's most appropriate in this section or in an earlier section when we talked about the components of the program, but I'd also like to see some emphasis or encouragement around employing people with a certain lived experience, whether it's, substance abuse, incarceration, or otherwise, be at kind of on the forefront of this approach, because I just feel like a lot of what drives people with trauma to not engage fully is a distrust or a lack of empathy or understanding from the person across the table from them. And I would like to make this be as authentic as possible. And that, in my mind, necessarily means employing people with a certain lived experience that will help them better connect and also would inform their service delivery.
Absolutely. Any further comments on this section? John?
Just a question, staff. So this is different because I think typically when grants go out, they go out and the RFP is for a county. Here we have jurisdictions broadly. So when we have data, you can have a county apply, you can have a city inside that county apply, and they could use the same data, but it may not be actually the most applicable data to one of them, right? So you could say in Alameda County that there's this rate of incarceration among people, this rate of poverty, whatever, but it may be that within any given city that's different. So I'm just wondering whether we have to, whether staff recommends that we call out something else other than just data, or how we distinguish data for the sake of multiple jurisdictions that overlap.
So purposes of this section, I'm glad you brought that up, John, because I didn't really touch on the language on page 21, but what's been really important to a lot of our ESCs is that we don't look just at quantitative data, but we also look at qualitative data. And really it's up to the applicants to lay out their goals and objectives and what they plan to measure. And then you score them on how well you think those goals and objectives and plan for evaluation is doable and logical. The data sets, I feel like you're speaking to maybe fit more when we talk about how they will describe their need and what data sets they may use or to describe their need. And I think again, it will come back to all of you in the scoring process to determine whether they made a strong case based on the data that they used. And if you think they used data that didn't do a good job in demonstrating their problem, then you will score them accordingly.
So to that end, thanks for that answer. So to that end, on the point of data, we talked earlier about the BSCC just providing technical review of applications, but are we expected then to fact check statistics that are given to us in an application summary? So if they, I mean, what is the reliance factor that we'll get that when county A says or applicant A says, 90% of the people incarcerated in our county are people of color, and we find that that is a persuasive statistic. If it's truthfully only 60%, we've given priority points to something that isn't fact checkable to us. How do we get to actually make sure that we get data that reflects what we really want to do?
That's a tough question. And, I think my colleagues at the BSCC know that I use this. I need to get bumper stickers printed to say, we just have to trust the process. We ask that you put some reasonable requirements in for a statement of need that is based on data and evidence where things are cited. I mean, so a couple of different thoughts. I think based on what we talked about earlier today, we will be able to provide, and this is what we spoke about over the break, we're going to have to go with readily available, consistently collected, agreed upon data sources in what we provide to you. So for all of the 58 counties, for any potential applicant, I think we can give you county level statistics as a starting place. We can't do every city, but we would even let the applicants know in the RFP. The committee wants to know some basic demographic facts about the county from within which this application comes. So we'll have things like county population, which is readily available, broken down by race and ethnicity, and rates of arrest. Probably, at various levels of crime, felonies, and misdemeanors. Probably not much beyond that. Now, when the applicant then describes their statement of need, they should, we hope, be able to provide a lot more information, and it just has to be persuasive to you. We don't have an ability to fact check, and I think we have to trust the process. Now, if something seemed completely out of whack to you, I guess we would want to come back and have that conversation. But in general, all we can do is rely on people to give us good information.
And while we're on this topic, we just sort of moved to data collection and evaluation, which is number 16. So if people are comfortable with the promising and data-driven approaches and innovative approaches, let's stay on this data collection and evaluation topic that John just took us to.
My follow-up just would be that if we're going to trust the process and the data and they have to give us that summary, can we, for any place where they're going to make cites to statistics, can we make them footnote?
Yes, of course.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, where'd you get that number, for sure.
Does anyone want to introduce this section, or should we just dive in?
We can dive right in. Again, here on page 22, number 16, we have, we require typically that applicants include a preliminary plan for how they will evaluate their program inside of their proposal. Then once the award is made, we require them to submit a more formalized evaluation plan. Typically that's put together in partnership with their research consultant or a university, et cetera. That formal plan is usually due 3 to 4 months after the award has been made, so that they have some time to get with their research partners and really look at the data that they plan to collect. And then at the end of the project, so in this case, at the end of the 3 years, they would turn in a formal evaluation report that looks at, that goes referring back to that initial plan that they submitted. What were their goals and objectives? What data did they collect, qualitative and quantitative? What changes did they see? What impacts did they see, et cetera? And so that's typically what we've done. We went away. I think there was a time where you would see grants required to do annual evaluations, and we came to realize that's just not, it's not a good way to do business, because in 1 year you're really not going to see any changes. So we require grantees to submit quarterly progress reports, and in those progress reports, we're looking more at the process outcomes. So did you hire staff? Did you get the program up and running? Are you getting the numbers you thought you would get? What's going on with your referral processes? But we don't require the more formal evaluation on the outcomes until the very end of the project.
Are we had said in this committee that we're looking at the end of 2 years of a 3-year cycle. If someone is actually producing the results that they said they were going to produce, and if they're making progress on their project, do you think we need to do the more formal evaluation after 2 years, or do you think these quarterly progress reports will give us enough information where we could request a formal evaluation if we think someone should be DQ'd, or if we think they're not making any progress, et cetera?
We could add in a requirement for, at the end of 2 years, they submit a preliminary evaluation report, kind of maybe a shorter version of their final evaluation report, looking at where they are against those goals and objectives that they set out, and then knowing that the very final evaluation report would be due after the grant had concluded.
Do you guys agree with that solution?
I'm a little unclear. It looks like, according to the paragraph, that the grantees would actually submit the local evaluation at the onset of receiving the grant. So it doesn't say what happens at the end of year 1 or the end of year 2. So do you think it would be better to have a local evaluation plan submitted after the first year or after the second year, as opposed to when they initially received funds?
We want them to do it when they initially receive the funds, so that they have a plan in place for collecting the data. Because if we wait too long, and they don't have a plan in place and they don't have the necessary agreements, a lot of time the data collection is going to require agreements. If they want to look at recidivism data, it's going to require agreements with probation or police, school data. So they have to have those MOUs or agreements in place up front. We've seen grantees that definitely make adjustments as the grant progresses, because they'll realize, well, the data we thought we were going to collect, it's not really panning out, or we realize it would be more impactful to collect this data, and we can allow them to make adjustments to their plan, but we really want them to have a plan up front going into the 3 years.
But when would it be executed? So they have this local evaluation plan. At what point is it fed back to the body to determine if it's actually being executed, if they're following that plan?
We review it, BSCC reviews it with our research team, and our research team helps us determine whether it's a viable plan, and then we typically give them feedback and have them make adjustments, and then we monitor along the way as we do our site visits through our program monitoring. We will work with them to see whether they're making progress against that plan, but then the final evaluation report, that is when we see the full execution of that plan.
And
that's at the very end of year 3.
Yeah.
But we're proposing.
Our discussion earlier was about how do we make sure that all the money's not exhausted and spent before stepping in. So, is it feasible, you think, to go ahead and have some kind of evaluation done at year 2 or the end of year 2, review that plan as opposed to waiting until the very end?
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to add that Colleen's description was helpful, but there are 2 distinct kinds of activities that are interconnected, but the grant monitoring is stuff that our staff does by receiving quarterly reports and going out to the field. And the monitoring is much more, you said in your project plan that by the end of year 1, you would have staff in place and you would begin, doing ABC activities. So the monitoring is that check-in, a lot of which comes through, quarterly reports being submitted. And we would be able to see and definitely have some sort of a feedback loop to say, we got a problem here. They're not getting off the ground, provide technical assistance and so forth. But what I'm hearing really clearly from the committee today is that in addition, you would like some preliminary report back at the end of 2 years on outcomes. What have you actually done? What level of success are you having in your services? Again, making a pitch that things do take time and recidivism is measured over a significant period of time, but nonetheless, some report, some sort of an evaluation of what's happened in the field beyond the monitoring piece you want at the end of year 2. So I just want to make sure I'm giving back to the committee what you're asking for.
Yeah, but I was thinking that before I knew that you were going to go out and monitor.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It still sounds like a good idea, I think. I don't know, but it sounds like a good idea, but I'm glad to hear that it would be monitored.
Yeah, so 2 different activities that are interrelated.
We did talk earlier about holding programs accountable in the second year to make sure they were doing what they said. So I think this is consistent with that. Strong statement.
Does the committee have comfort in this plan? Great. Well, we are done with the 16 sections, but I'd love to add a quick conversation about timelines, and I think we have those in the back slot of our booklet here. So let's have a brief discussion here before we move to public comment.
I have a quick question about the evaluation. Are we saying that are we going to limit the amount of money that they will potentially put in there to pay for evaluation?
Oh, good question. And I was that under the funding section, we have seen ESCs set a minimum requirement that grantees set aside X amount of dollars to their data collection and evaluation efforts. We've seen 10%, 20%, requiring them to then, dedicate those dollars. We have not gone so far as to require that they partner with the university. That's been, that idea has been tossed around, but typically, whether it be their internal research division or they're partnering with an outside consultant, private, or a university, they set aside those funds.
May I also ask, I guess related to the data question, I'm sorry to belabor this, but I'm just wondering in terms of how do you actually measure recidivism if you don't have a probation department or some kind of relationship? Because that's really the only way you're going to be able to measure it. People can say all kinds of stuff, but really at the end of the day, how do we hold these grantees accountable and in terms of really achieving that end goal?
And it's very difficult if you're going to do it correctly because we've adopted the Board of State and Community Correction Center's definition of recidivism, but in order for us to really be confident in the data that we're collecting, we have to actually manually run rap sheets and have staff physically go through and enter the information on a spreadsheet and we send it to our outside evaluators. So it's very, very labor intensive. There's no, unless you just do a local check, but that doesn't necessarily tell you. And as John kind of talked about earlier, our clients move back and forth and travel back and forth. And so it is difficult unless you're doing it that way and it is time consuming.
I know Scott stepped out, but just real quick, before we got to the full calendar, I wanted to commend the BSCC for how they've conducted this process from the very beginning. And that's not to make a comment on how things have been in the past. I just feel that this has been an extremely collaborative and productive process. And I'm really grateful, as I want to echo some of the things Judge Eskin said, I'm really grateful to be here and be with everybody. I do want to make an ask that I have heard in public comment at the BSCC before, and not having served on an ESC before, I just hope that we can, when we look at number 3, which I realize we may make changes or suggestions here, but that when that draft RFP and grant summary goes out, I would hope that we also post it that same day to the BSCC's website for public interaction. This body has consistently talked about this is a community thing. This is a community, goes to communities in the end. We are representatives of the faces that do the different levels of service and advocacy around this. And we, I think in a spiritual sense, are part of something bigger than just the 15 to 17 of us. And so for me, it is extremely important that when we post this, that the entire state and anyone who's interested in this program have a chance to receive that, provide feedback, and be prepared to come here on September 7th. So I would just ask that if it doesn't require a formal motion, that 3 be amended to include posting online.
Can I have a question before we get to?
Right, and I want to
okay,
further
perfect.
back to the evaluation. Have we landed yet on dollar amounts? Okay. Not just on the evaluation, but because that will influence what I think about the evaluation based upon how much money we're talking about each grantee is possibly going to receive.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the last thing the group kind of agreed to was just a range.
And what is the range?
We wanted to bring options back to you. So would you rather spend more time as a committee to think about that today and weigh in on it?
No, I'm fine with that, but it will be hard for me to wrap my brain around how much money we're talking about for an evaluation. And when you do that, then come up with the range. I would love to know, like typically how much things like transitional housing cost, so we have a sense of what's reasonable.
I also hate to belabor this, what might be more theoretical than practical issue. And it goes back to the jury instruction analogy. If we should happen to know if that information in a proposal is wrong, it's misrepresented, I'm not comfortable with simply, because in the jury trial analogy, I have a motion for new trial.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Which
Understood.
we won't have.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, isn't there a way of bringing to the forefront something that any one of us might know is not correct?
Yeah. I think we are at a point where we want to have a process, and the BSCC does have many decades of experience of using this executive steering committee process, building an RFP, deciding on grant criteria, rating as a group. So I'll make a couple of comments on my own behalf, and then ask my colleagues to weigh in, because Colleen and Daryl and Ricardo and a lot of people in this room have tons of experience in administering different grants. Part of the process, as you read and rate, we will ask you to hew very closely to the evidence that is submitted. But my sense is that what has happened in prior grants is, and again, jumping ahead, Judge, to this thing of, we promise we're going to train you, and we will. That training will include, how to read and all that sort of thing. And then what will happen is you will read all of these on your own and score them and make your comments and note your concerns or whatever those might be. This committee comes back together for a day of discussion of where you are. And so again, Tony Jackson from our research team will show you. And now you're on, just to make up an example, you're on proposal number 11, and you have a range of scores on some given section from 5 to 20, and you gave this proposal a 5 and I gave it a 20. I can tell you why I gave it a 20. You can tell me why you gave it a 5. And I think on balance, anomalies are identified, concerns come out, and the process works. So Ricardo, Daryl, Colleen.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I just comment real quickly on this? Maybe you can think about it when we have our scoring training. So I was on the 1022 ESC, and I followed the training and your direction very closely, where I used the whole entire scale.
Yes.
Well, it was good, except when we got to the point where we were grading criterias, I felt like I was the only one who used the whole entire scale. And so I found myself in a position where I was having to justify all my low scores, you know, where
Again and again.
other people always had everybody pretty much in the 85s to 100, where I used the whole scale, and then I felt like I was constantly having to justify and defend my
Right,
positions.
right. You know, I think in a process like this, you will find that the raters tend to clump. You know, you'll be reviewing on your own. I think we will also find, I'll make a prediction, that there are going to be a couple of relatively easy graders and a couple of relatively hard graders. And so that's really where the line winds up being drawn. I mean, the proposals just wind up, you know, being sorted out by quality based on the collective wisdom of this group. And I actually think as a hard grader, you wind up making more of a difference, quite frankly. I mean, my research colleagues would back me up, because if each proposal, you know, at the margin has to work harder to get a higher score from you, that's what's going to move them up or down. So I would just, again, request that when it comes time to score, you do use the entire score. You don't give everybody an A, and I just think that supports a better result.
All right, so that said, now we can go back to, I think, where John was leading us to, which is to the timeline. So if you look in the back of your binder, there's an insert, and it's got a draft written all over it. It's the very back, it's the insert. So the first and most obvious caution, which we'll say over and over again, is that everything that's on there is a draft. And so be mindful of that, of this. We want to share it with you, to give you some initial layout of what's to come, what's to expect. So, you know, just starting at the top with some of the very basics. We had our initial briefing meetings, obviously, back June 23rd to 24th. Step 2 is kind of where we are today. And so as of right now, staff's plan is to, based on these 2 days worth of conversation, to bring back a draft RFP for you to review, acknowledging what's been said by others. Obviously, staff will make that information publicly available. Going forward, as of right now, the only additional meeting we have set is for September the 7th. Beyond that, and so we'll have some other steps that we need to do, and part of that could be that when we provide a draft RFP, the group says, "Thanks a lot, staff, but that's not what we were thinking. Can we fine-tune this a bit more?" Or, "Thanks a lot, staff, that's great, we want to add to it." So that's where some of those next steps come in. So that's why you see in 5 where it's a bit of a yellow, you know, that if necessary, you know, we've got some flexibility that we're trying to build in there. And we also have some time for a revised RFP and grant summary. We've also built in time for some comments to be due back. So we're hoping for this to be a very interactive process, but we've also set some firm dates. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember when we were setting these dates, we landed on 2 follow-up dates, which was the 7th and the 8th. Are you saying that we should now release the 8th as a
Did you land on the 8th?
I just have the 7th.
Yeah, we just have the 7th.
So drop the 8th.
Okay.
Drop the 8th.
So let's see. So then moving down to step 10, with the assumption that the above is obviously flexible, our goal is to present to the board a draft RFP, to be released publicly. Scott, Leticia, and a few others that are on our board will then at some point make a recommendation and vote on that. And then our goal will then be to release that request for proposal the very next day to maximize that out in the field. Barring, you know, any additional comments or edits from the board, we'll try to be very timely with that. So step 12, what we typically do, just to not assume the process, is we have what are called bidders conferences. I know folks call them different things, but in essence, it's an opportunity for the field to ask questions about the RFP. So it says that eligibility is defined as this. Is this accurate? You know, we're in region A, is this accurate? And sometimes it gets a lot more technical, but the thought process is that we go on the road, you know, maybe north, central, south, or whatever the case might be, and provide opportunities for folks to ask clarifying questions. We've built in a non-binding notice of intent to apply, which gives us a sense as staff of how many proposals potentially could come our way so that we can allocate the appropriate resources. And then kind of in the spirit of allowing a maximum or a lot of time for folks to start local partnerships, re-engage partnerships, whatever the case might be. We have responses not due back until February as of right now. So from November 18 all the way until February of 2017, we've got this request for proposal out in the field. And then if you flip the page, then we go into that technical review period. That's what Darryl and Colleen were kind of leading you through. And then Judge, then we get to this, these next couple of steps, this rater training, where we kind of go into a bit more detail, and our staff provides a mock proposal or two. And this group sits together and you read. And then in real time, we'll show the different scores that each of you present. We'll show where there's variances, we'll show where you're together. And that's usually a trend that comes up later on in the process when it comes to scoring. We have to talk about how long the rater review period is, but what we try to do is to allow a reasonable amount of time. Part of the challenge is we don't have a sense of how many proposals are going to come in. That's why you see there's a lot of flexibility there. We'll have a set date by which proposals are due. And then with a goal then of presenting funding recommendations to the board in June 2017. A lot of the reasons, again, that we said some of this is very much subject to change is the board's schedule for 2017 is not yet set. So we may require some flexibility. And then we can, in this particular model, begin July 1. So that's just a rough outline. As this group decides to add things on, obviously it's flexible, but we wanted to at least give you an outline of what to expect.
Thanks, Ricardo. If there are no questions from the group, I'd like to move to public comment. Right, do we have cards? Do we have cards? Yeah, let's get in.
Mr. Chair, while we're asking our commenters to fill out their cards, can we try to button down some future meeting dates?
I thought we just did that.
Specific dates. We have these TBDs within a range. So, Colleen, do you wanna, or one of you guys wanna, because you know what we need. Do we need 1 day meetings or 2 day meetings? If we were to try to button down some good dates, how do you wanna do this?
Oh, right. So in terms of just pure process, so let's for the sake of conversation say that we already know we're gonna come back on September the 7th with a product. Part of it then is trying to figure out how much time this group will need to then flesh out the rating criteria, and that in itself is a pretty lengthy process. It might be beneficial to plan for a full additional day. We may start some things, but it's definitely not something that you want to rush through. And part of that is you guys have a lot of different opinions that are really valuable, but then agreeing on how to rate each of those can be really tricky. So if we could find one additional day in September for rating development, that would be a great starting point.
September.
So the bids are now open.
September is going to be very hard for me. It'd be better if we could look in October.
And will the meetings be here?
The next meeting that's September the 7th is, the next meeting that's scheduled for September the 7th is here. Beyond that date, we haven't, because we don't know the other dates, we haven't set locations.
Sometimes for the convenience of the committee, we like to do a Northern and a Southern California location. We're very open to your input on that.
I could do end of September if we're not traveling, if we're in Southern California.
In Southern
If we're in
California.
Southern California, I could do September, otherwise October.
Scott, can you help us get a meeting location?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Okay, so what days do you like, Scott? Let's start with you and our co-chairs on the phone, so Leticia will ask you to chime in. What dates are good and open for you, Scott?
I'll just open up to the committee anytime the weekend of the week of the 26th.
Great.
You're in New York all week?
Could be
Friday
back
the
Friday.
30th?
I can't be here Friday.
Okay. The week of no, that's not the work.
The week before, September 23rd, Scott? Or 22nd?
No.
Okay. So we have a board meeting, sorry, BSCC board meets on the 22nd, would the 23rd?
By the way, I could do, if we meet on the 22nd, I could do the 21st in Sacramento.
Okay, Wednesday, September 21st.
John cannot do the 21st. The week of October 10th. That's Columbus Day, so that's no good. 11th, 12th, 13th. 11, 12, 13th?
Those work for you, Scott?
Yep.
Leticia, 11, 12, 13? Probably Tuesday's not so good for Leticia. Wednesday or Thursday?
Yes. 11th, 12th, and 13th?
Yes. October?
11, 12, and 13, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay, well, Tuesday's always my board session.
Right.
So missing is a big deal for me.
Yeah.
So 12th or 13th?
Well, it's open.
Okay, and 13th?
I can't do the 13th.
13 is open.
I can do the 12th.
Does anyone have a problem with the 12th? Wednesday, oh, Tom.
We were so close.
Friday, Scott, you can't do Friday the 14th?
No.
Okay.
13th.
What do you do, Shelley?
I can't hear everything. What are we deciding?
Don't worry, we're not deciding yet.
We're still taking votes.
Are any of those dates, like, people can't call in, like, if we said?
You can call in. Just a reminder on Bagley Keene rules. We really, of course, prefer for people to be present, but if you can participate from a telephonic location, the rules on Bagley Keene are, we have to post the alternate location, and it needs to be in a public place where the public can come and participate along with the committee member who's in a different location.
Who was it that could not do the week of the 26th of September?
I could do October 13th, but not from Sacramento,
October 13th in Los Angeles?
in San Francisco.
Oh.
Which is fine. I mean, you all can meet wherever.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, you could do it remotely.
I could do remotely.
Any other issues with Thursday the 13th? Frankie? Cannot.
You can't do it over the phone either, Frank.
Was it Tom who had a problem with October 12th? Yeah. Okay, is there any chance for a telephonic?
No, because that's the governing board for
Okay.
the association, so.
Okay.
Week of the 17th? What about the 17th, Monday the 17th itself?
I could do telephonic on the 17th.
And can anybody not do the 17th?
I'm open.
And Charity on the phone, Monday, the 17th of October?
Oh, that works. We're just choosing one day in October, correct?
That's right, one day in October.
Oops. I just may have to leave early. I have a board meeting that night.
But what if we do it in LA?
Then it's perfect.
Are people okay with that?
All right, let's lock it in.
Monday, October 17th in Los Angeles.
Scott, we need your help with the venue, so just make it.
I'll help you.
Scott's house.
Scott's house.
Yes. Okay, just for clarification, was that for a meeting that's in box number 5?
I'm sorry.
So did we just set the date for the meeting that's in box number 5 that?
Oh, yes. Is it 5 and 7? What's the Monday, October 17th meeting gonna be?
A lot of it was just meant to be flexible. So it'd be easier to just say that as of right now, we've got 2 meetings set for September the 7th and for Monday, October the 17th. And a lot of that is just flex time, which we may not need at this point. So that's all that is.
I just wanted to clarify it. Thank you.
But Ricardo, if we do the meeting on the 17th, October 17th, that throws off the entire rest of the calendar, right?
We have some flats built in there. So in other words, we should be further along in the redrafting on October 17th, getting you a more fully baked cake kind of a deal.
Great, so I'd love to move on to public comment. Let's start 2 minutes apiece. Let's start with Pamela. Is it Pamela West?
I'd like to thank the Board of State Community Corrections for the savings that are going to happen in the future with all the lawsuits that happened from Plata, Clark, Armstrong. We're being historic. In counties where that we look at evidence-based, if they can be efforts to outcome. In our county, basically, like when we contracted with BI or GO, our Board of Supervisors asked for a needs assessment based in the communities. So I was wondering whether that part of it could be that RFPs would include a community needs assessment that is done in public hearings, as the judge had put, so that the public had basically can give their input through a needs assessment that is data driven. The data that we have in the county reflects the system. But for savings, even with in our county, we want a disclosure with the CCP meeting about how much savings have came from those people who have been released. So if there can be a county disclosure of savings and reinvestment, we'd like that. And then a county needs assessment with our Board of Supervisors that hasn't been followed through with AB 109. So I would like it to be different with this executive steering committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela. Next up, Juan Gomez, Milpa.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. I just want to say real quick, just as a reminder, you know, the tribal lands and the res, they oftentimes they mention here at all, and just to be mindful of that, and if even needed as an equity approach to make a specific maybe allocations for them, as they may or may not apply for this. However, we know that they're not represented in this table at least, and that we should just always keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. James Adams.
Good afternoon. I'm on more calm today.
Welcome back. Thank you.
Just to have an understanding, again, what's going on in my family, my house, and how important this is to us. What you're going to hear from me is basically just an echo of what Pam said. So the issues we have in our county is that we have what are you call stakeholders, or people who have been in the business of doing these things in our county for so long, but they don't see themselves as responsible to us who are in the county, to the people who are receiving the benefits of these type of programs. What we need from you in this that you're doing, we need to make sure that they have to report to you really very specifically what they're doing. We need to be able to see ourselves in our county, when my wife is spending, she's often leaving the house at 8 o'clock in the morning and not coming back until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, or she's going out and signing people up for Prop 47, or she's working really hard in our community to get the word out. What you don't know is, while we've been here, she's had people working at the church we were married in, the First Methodist back at home, signing people up in the last couple of days. They handed out 30 shirts and signed up 3 people yesterday. So while this is going on, the results of this is not being reported by the county to us, to you, to anyone else. There's no feedback to what our efforts are providing. And I'm sorry, this is where, again, I get emotional. We must have that information. We need you to make sure that that gets back to us and our community and people who are involved.
James, thanks again. Erica Wilson, starting over.
Hi, my name is Erica Wilson. Excuse me, I have stage fright. I hate putting this up here.
You're good, girl.
Ooh, I just had to say that, get that off. But yeah, yesterday I was listening to everyone share, and I was just like, you know, really just, I didn't fill out a card because I was, you know, scared to put my hands on. But, you know, I am in Starting Over along with that Bonia runs, and I am also working as her legal assistant. She is training me to be her legal assistant. I've been working with her like a little over 6 months. Now I have no experience in legal, you know, work or anything, but I am learning a lot, and I appreciate the fact that
you got this.
I'm sorry, I told myself I wasn't gonna cry, and then I do that. But like, like the others that came up here and spoke, yesterday, it's very emotional for me because I am also a recovering addict. I'm currently at 3.5 years clean.
Great work.
And that is also with the help of, a 12-step program that I'm actively involved in, also with the transitional/sober living that Vonia runs. It's mandatory to attend these meetings regardless if you're an addict, or recovering addict or not. So they, the fact that these women come into this home and they notice that, or men come into this home and they say, okay, I'm not an addict or anything, but they come into the, and they attend these meetings, they realize that they are suffering from something. It may not be an addiction to drugs and alcohol, but it's addiction or anything to, they're suffering or recovering actually from something, recovering from a divorce, recovering from, a domestic abuse, situation or stuff, in that order. So, I was also the house manager at the, house, and I'm currently still doing that. So for the women and children's home. And so I get a lot of, calls and stuff coming in from different areas, just like you were speaking about, John, about how, in the areas they have to move locations in order to get help. So it was like places like Lancaster and stuff were calling, seeking places for their, seeking homes and stuff for their families from Lancaster all the way to Corona, where we're located. And I'm like wondering, why is it that they have to, it's like they don't have these, they need more. They didn't need enough out there so they can, these people stay close to their families, especially if they have children that are in the system. They have visitations and stuff, so they want to be close where they are. And get that, are able to visit and stuff. They don't have to travel, and most of them don't have cars. So they have to travel by bus. And then where do you get the, the funds for bus fare when you can't even get a job because the jobs aren't even hiring, because of you being, in the system or, anything, being, homeless situation, transient, recovering addict, being, that you have a record. I had went and I'm like learning a lot now, and I've realized that now I have a voice, because I used to sit back and just like feel depressed, like you were stating, before, feel depressed and feel like this is just my life, I just have to deal with it. I'm suffering the consequences for my actions. But why should I have to suffer the consequences for my actions when I'm trying to make a change and trying to do something different now? And I have children that are looking up to me, and they need to have a good role model, and I'm trying to be that for them. And it's like, and there's, and I feel like that a lot of people out there like myself, we don't have the hope, there's no hope out there. And that's what they need to remember, is that there is hope, and that we need to instill that into them and let them know that there is help, and that in the communities, and the ones that know best are the ones that are in the communities and see it every day and are living it.
Thank you very much, Erica. All right, last up, Samantha Walters.
As you all may know, this is not just my life, this is my work too. We need level of services to strengthen relationships in communities. We need accountability not only from the people, but from the organizations as well. We need to put the money back into the community, because that's what they got it for. So many people aren't as blessed as I was when I got out of prison. They couldn't get jobs, and they ended up in Chinatown, where I'm from, where I live at now. And they're just trying. A lot of them are just trying to get jobs, but because they're felons for petty crimes, they can't get a job. Because they're a felon, they can't get Section 8 housing. Where are they supposed to go? And then they turn around and they knock down their homes, their tents. They take their possessions that they have, which is so little. It's just not fair. They trying and trying, and people, community, organizations, and keeps knocking them down. They don't know what to do. They need help. They need this money so they can get the help. They need Proposition 47 so they can get these felonies taken away from them, and they're trying so hard.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Samantha, for always bringing it home. Erica, thank you for your comments today. Appreciate you stepping up. This is hands down the best ESC I've ever sat on. One of the most eclectic and interesting groups of people, passionate groups of people that really understand what's going on out there. So great 2 days, everyone, and we'll see each other September 7th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.